Chapter 651, The Fearsome Zhao Yamen. Chapter 651, The Fearsome Zhao Yamen. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Lightning lit Wang Baoli's eyes as he dashed out and raced towards the bloodstains and tattered clothes. He summoned the puppets around him and ordered them to search the area. As Wang Baoli conducted a frantic search, Zhao Yamen was in a valley 50 kilometers away from him. She had just spat out a mouthful of blood. Her face was ashen, and her hair loose. She clutched a compass tightly in her hands. The compass gave off a brilliant light that formed a defensive barrier, sheltering Zhao Yamen within. The light was growing weaker. It looked as if it wasn't going to last much longer. Blue fire burned outside the barrier, trapping her within. There were numerous faces in the fire that repeatedly slammed into the barrier while howling at Zhao Yamen. The defensive barrier kept them at bay for now, but its light was growing weaker. The surrounding temperature rose as the blue flames continued burning, and an elder stood inside the fire. He wore the robes of the Dao Palace and was a nascent Soul Realm cultivator in Mieliez's faction. There was an intense light in his eyes as he stared at Zhao Yamen, who was trapped inside her defensive barrier, laughing hoarsely. "You think you can run when I'm here?" He raised his right hand as he spoke and pressed it against the defensive barrier. The barrier began to creak, and it looked as if it was about to cave in. It was a miracle that it was still standing. "Interesting. You have quite a few lifesavers up your sleeve." The elder laughed. He didn't seem troubled by that. His eyes lingered on Zhao Yamen, assessing, with unconcealed hunger. "Little girl, I've noticed how special you are during the trial for the hyacinthus tree leaves. You're not just a natural numinous being, all of your 7 orifices are open. Not bad at all. You'll be a superior grade material for refining spirit orifice pills. A rare find." The elder smiled, and the hunger in his eyes intensified. He brought both hands together to form a series of hand seals, causing the flames around Zhao Yamen to grow stronger. They licked at her defensive barrier. He continued with another series of hand seals as he circled Zhao Yamen and imprinted seals on the ground. Multiple runic imprints surrounded Zhao Yamen, and the flames rose higher with their appearance. Zhao Yamen trembled and spat out a mouthful of blood. Her arms trembled, and the compass almost slipped from her fingers. She didn't try to wipe the blood from her lips. Instead, Zhao Yamen lifted her head and leveled a cold stare at the smiling elder. The look in his eyes looked more terrifying with each moment's passing. He had pursued her for days. She hadn't found anyone else since she had awoken. She had traveled with extreme caution without encountering much danger, until she crossed paths with the elder. Her opponent had a clear goal. He seemed to have known her location all along, attacking her as soon as he appeared. If not for the extremely valuable artifact that her father had given her, which had helped in fighting off what should have been a lethal blow, she would have been dead. Even with such an artifact in her possession, she was still trapped. She knew that the elder had no intentions of killing her immediately. He wanted to use her to refine a spirit orifice pill. Zhao Yamen bit her lips. She wasn't angry, and she wasn't about to say anything to the elder. Her cultivation continued churning inside her body. She was nearly drained dry, but that didn't stop her from pouring her energy into the compass. The compass was an 8th grade dharmic armament that she had brought along from the Federation. It was something that was meant to save her life. She had created a seal after acquiring the Ikang ancient array formation and imprinted that on the compass, which had further boosted the compass power. The compass was fully activated now. With the joint power from the pendant hanging on her neck, she had managed to resist the attacks of a nascent Soul Realm cultivator. However, she knew that the pendant's power was waning. Once it was completely depleted, she wouldn't be able to maintain her defense for long with only the array formation at her disposal. She had done what she could to send signals for help. For the past 3 days, she had left traces of her blood and tattered bits of her clothes behind while fleeing her enemy. They were meant to be calls for help. Yet, she hadn't seen a third person in this world. Her morale was beginning to suffer, despite her stoicism. However, she hadn't lost all hope. She wasn't a weakling. She had her ambitions, her dreams, and her beliefs. Hidden beneath her calm exterior was a burning fire. She would either burn others or herself. Zhao Yameng realized at this point that no one was likely going to come to her aid. Determination colored her eyes as she deliberately projected her intentions and ensured the elder saw her form a series of hand seals. The compass, which should have held on for longer, suddenly shook violently and exploded. The explosion caused by an 8th grade Dharmic armament wasn't something to be underestimated. Zhao Yameng had imprinted a seal of the Yikang ancient array formation on the compass, which further strengthened the force of the explosion. A thunderous boom erupted, whipping up a howling hurricane that surged outwards in all directions. The blue fire shrank and wavered, almost to the point of extinguishing. Mountains moaned and caved in. The attack would have injured a nascent soul realm cultivator if it had been unexpected, but the grim determination in Zhao Yameng's eyes had been too obvious to miss. Her enemy had sensed her attack, and mocking laughter rang in the air as he retreated and avoided the shock wave sparked by the hurricane. He lifted his right hand and made a grab through the air. The blue flames, which had been weakened, erupted once again with renewed vigor. They transformed into a gigantic burning hand that stretched towards Zhao Yameng. Zhao Yameng appeared calm in the face of a failed attempt that hadn't only been evaded but had landed herself in greater danger. However, there was a flicker of panic and despair in her eyes as she retreated and unleashed her full cultivation. There was no way she could have evaded capture with her core formation realm cultivation and her injuries. The gigantic hand caught her almost immediately. With a swift yank, it pulled her back and held her before the nascent soul realm cultivator. "Little girl, your schemes are too childish," the elder smiled. He raised his right hand abruptly as he spoke, grabbing the pendant on Zhao Yameng's neck and flinging it aside. The pendant exploded, sending forth a series of shock waves stronger than the ones after the compass explosion that surged outwards. Zhao Yameng's face paled instantly. The earlier explosion was to lure me into complacency so that the second one with the pendant might work. "Little girl, you're still too," the elder was interrupted by Zhao Yameng, who suddenly shot a flying needle out of her mouth while the expression on her pale face remained unchanged. "Childish tactics." The elder had a look of disdain in his eyes. He raised his left hand and caught the needle that had been aiming for his forehead. The look on his face turned from one of mockery to something else as soon as he touched the needle. It disintegrated, turning into a grey mist that dashed towards his eyes. The elder shut his eyes instinctively as the needle approached. Zhao Yameng's face was still pale, but the panic and despair in her eyes had vanished, replaced with ferocity. She lifted her right hand. Her index finger touched her thumb, then pressed firmly downwards. Something extremely small appeared to be planted in her thumb. It was activated with the firm press. 2 beams of light exploded from her thumb, one red and the other white. The white light curled around Zhao Yameng and transformed into a protective air bubble, while the red light rushed towards the nascent soul realm elder. If one were to take a really close look at the red light, he might see a tiny, grain-sized crystal that had clearly been compressed numerous times. A terrifying wave of energy erupted from the crystal and hit the elder before he could react, triggering an explosion. A barrier materialized at the same instant. It seemed to target one's spirit chi, sealing the target's cultivation. The strong backlash against spirit chi created a fist-sized black hole that seemed capable of tearing apart and consuming everything. This was the fusion of the Federation's most advanced technology and spirit energy, the anti-spirit bomb. The elder let loose a pain scream amidst the thunderous explosion, his physical form turning to pulp as he fell back. Zhao Yameng retreated under the defensive barrier of the white light, though her injuries were severe. The defensive barrier didn't prevent her from spitting out a mouthful of blood. Her body was extremely weak at this moment, but the fierce light in her eyes didn't waver. One wouldn't find any weakness or despair in her eyes. It hadn't been inexperience that had led to her intentional display of grim determination or panic. Blowing up the compass and the pendant had been an attempt at lowering the elder's guard. She needed him to feel confident of his success. That was when she would strike and unleash her most powerful attack on him. She knew that she only had one chance, which was why she had to exercise extreme caution. Chapter 652, You're Courting Death. Chapter 652, You're Courting Death. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. She had left the anti-spirit bomb that her father had given her as her true last resort. Deafening thunder boomed in the air as the anti-spirit bomb exploded. The nascent soul realm elder retreated frantically, throwing spells and artifacts in the air as defense. But he had stood too close to Zhao Yameng. No matter how quickly he reacted, even if he were to teleport himself away, he would still have been a moment too late. The anti-spirit bomb was the most powerful weapon the Federation had invented. The black hole that had been created from the explosion, and the sealing properties it had towards one's cultivation drew a furious cry from the elder, as his body was torn apart right before Zhao Yameng's eyes. Bones protruded from his chest. A powerful force swept across his face, mashing his features into a bloody pulp, which pulled apart rapidly to expose bones that were then smashed to bits. Everything happened within a single moment. Screams of pain pierced the air as the elder's body was broken down into parts and torn to bits. Even his bones were smashed. Anyone else would have died on the spot, but the elder was still stumbling back, a blinding red light shining inside his body. It was emanating from his bones. 6 arms burst out from his maimed and mutilated body, tearing new holes in his flesh. There were also 2 fleshy lumps on each side of his neck, which bulged outwards and burst out into 2 heads. It was as if there had been another body hidden inside the elder all along. What had appeared to be a Dao Palace cultivator had simply been a layer of clothes. His true form was a member of the Never-Ending Clan. The Never-Ending Clan cultivator emerged violently from the elder's old body, staggering backwards. Zhao Yameng's breathing quickened as shock gripped her mind. The Never-Ending Clan elder grabbed hold of the ground as he stumbled, tightened his grip, and finally froze in place. He lifted his heads. Blood spilled from his lips, he was panting, and his body was covered with gaping wounds. Despite the protection offered by his Dao Palace cultivator's body, his true form hadn't emerged unscathed from the powerful attack. He had a scowl on his face, and his red eyes were colored with wariness as he stared viciously at Zhao Yameng. You almost managed to kill me. For a mere core formation realm cultivator to do that, it looks like I've underestimated you, the Never-Ending Clan elder said hoarsely, speaking in the language of the Dao Palace. Zhao Yameng staggered backwards, her breathing uneven as she remained silent. A sense of regret rose inside her. This was the extent of what she was capable of. She hadn't exactly failed. If her opponent weren't of the Never-Ending Clan but a true Dao Palace cultivator, he would have been destroyed in both body and soul. Perhaps this is my fate. Zhao Yameng took a deep breath. There was bitterness in her heart, but not despair. She accepted her fate. Zhao Yameng narrowed her eyes. Her right hand lifted and then raced towards her forehead. If there was no way for her to win this fight, then she would rather end her own life than be refined into a pill that would strengthen her enemy. She would rather die than submit. The Never-Ending Clan elder rushed forward just as Zhao Yameng raised her right hand, appearing before her. With an almost nonchalant wave of his right hand, he slapped Zhao Yameng's arm away with an explosive blow. Zhao Yameng was flung into the air and thrown into a stone wall. Blood spilled from Zhao Yameng's lips as her vision turned blurry. She clenched her jaw and refused to allow any sound to escape from her lips. She struggled to open her eyes, then stared unblinkingly as the Never-Ending Clan elder approached her slowly. I admire your character, but you don't get to choose whether you live or die. I won't allow you to blow yourself up. Only refining a living person will improve a pill's quality. That pill will allow me a full recovery to the former peak of my cultivation. That will be your fate. The Never-Ending Clan elder narrowed his eyes, his tone full of absolute authority. He took a step forward and was about to approach Zhao Yameng when he suddenly frowned. One of his arms formed a series of hand seals, then pushed abruptly to its right. At that exact moment, a figure dashed out from his right like a bolt of lightning. The Never-Ending Clan elder was quicker though and caught it with his right hand as it charged out. It was a puppet. It exploded as soon as it came into contact with the elder, doing so before he could crush it with his bare hands. The loud explosion erupted in the air. The elder frowned, then saw 7 to 8 puppets charging at him from different directions. Zhao Yameng's breathing grew uneven when she saw those puppets, and her eyes sharpened as life returned to them. Minor tricks. Disdain flickered in the elder's eyes. He had suffered grievous injuries in the past, and his recovery was incomplete, leaving him at the early-stage nascent soul realm at the moment. In fact, his cultivation had fallen to the core formation realm after suffering the attack from the anti-spirit bomb. However, his confidence in himself remained unwavering. As the puppets came charging at him, he crouched down, tightened all 6 hands into fists, and punched them into the ground. Waves of spirit energy swept outwards, roaring and forming visible ripples in the air that crushed the incoming puppets. The never-ending clan elder leaped into the air and raced towards Zhao Yameng. His hands formed a series of hand seals, causing flames to burst into life. He was planning to forcibly refine her. It was then that a howl, tinged with madness, fury, and violence, rang out behind him, like a rush of thunder whipping through the air. "You're courting death." The thunderous roar rose to the skies as a sharp shrill whistled through the air and materialized as a black beam of light. It dashed forward like a shooting star, a blur of black light that screamed incredible power. Alarm flashed across the never-ending clan elder's eyes a second time. The first time had been when Zhao Yameng had blown up an anti-spirit bomb in his face. He didn't hesitate, not even having time to pull Zhao Yameng in front of him as a human shield. His body blurred as he teleported 100 feet away. The black beam of light swerved sharply the moment he vanished into thin air, twisting itself in front of Zhao Yameng without slowing down in the slightest. It seemed to have locked onto the never-ending clan elder, continuing to charge towards the elder. The light was the black pike. It looked as if it were slicing through emptiness, moving so quickly that the never-ending clan elder, who was impeded by his original injuries, couldn't teleport away a second time. The pike landed a direct hit. The elder's breathing grew uneven. His 6 palms came together to form a flurry of hand seals. Palms pressed against palms, and 6 black lines came together to form an image of a demonic face. The image collided with the black pike, and a deafening boom resonated in the air. The black pike finally paused in its pursuit, and a black lightning bolt snaked out from the pike during the momentary pause, expanding in size rapidly. A figure stepped out from the lightning, grew from the size of an open palm to that of a human, and then flung out its fist. The punch hadn't been boosted by the Flame Snatch the Arch armor, but it was still the strongest punch to be thrown by Wang Baoli's avatar. It unleashed the full power of the lightning immortal transformation as well as the supernova. Lightning erupted all around the fist when it landed, and it swelled and transformed into a gigantic ball of lightning that then exploded in the never-ending clan elder's face. Countless lightning bolts surged across the cracked ground. The never-ending clan elder had sustained significant injuries from Zhao Yameng's anti-spirit bomb, so the unexpected hit from Wang Baoli sent him stumbling back and spitting blood from his mouth. With his retreat, he could no longer hold the black pike at bay, and it charged forward. The elder's mind buzzed as he twisted his body and barely avoided being stabbed somewhere vital. Instead, the pike stabbed his shoulder and went right through. Blood splattered everywhere as the elder beat a hasty retreat, roaring furiously. "Wang Baoli, you!" Wang Baoli caught up with him before he was done cursing, reappearing like a bolt of lightning. He was going to force his avatar into the elder's body and blow it up from the inside. Chapter 653, Refinement Through Lightning. Chapter 653, Refinement Through Lightning. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Wang Baoli's avatar arrived before the elder within a flash. There was violence in his eyes and murder in his heart. Wang Baoli couldn't control his urge to kill after seeing Zhao Yameng being grievously injured before his eyes. The never-ending clan elder's breathing quickened as he sensed Wang Baoli's murderous aura. Terror struck him dumb. Wang Baoli and the threat of death loomed over him heavily. The never-ending clan elder bit the tip of his tongue suddenly and spat out a mouthful of blood. The blood transformed into a blood fog, which then spread out and formed a wall that stopped Wang Baoli's approach. Wang Baoli's true form could have smashed it to bits with a single punch from his Flame Snatch the Arch armor. His avatar wasn't as powerful as his true form, but it possessed advantages the latter didn't have as well, and that was its body of lightning that could take on all forms and none at all. Wang Baoli's avatar melted away as soon as the crimson wall appeared in its path. It transformed into a sea of lightning that spread out and went straight through the wall. Instead of gathering together, it flooded over the elder and snaked into his body from every pore. The elder cried out in pain. The sensation he had was of being struck by lightning. His flesh was being ripped apart, and his insides were burning while his organs spasmed in agony. The pain was worse than the worst form of torture as his entire body was flooded with electricity. He felt as if a large ball of electricity was gathering inside his body, and that it was going to explode and blow him up. Blood seeped from his orifices without stop, and terror enveloped him. The elder cried out in pain. Then, he gritted his teeth. His eyes shone with madness as he smacked his head on the right violently. "Get out!" The head exploded loudly in a mist of blood and flesh. The blood mist formed an illusory bloody hand in the air and made a grab at his own body. The lightning surging through his body froze instantly. Numerous bolts wormed out of his body, as if yanked out by the illusory bloody hand. This would have been a simple feat at the height of his power, but it was clear that he was struggling with his current level of cultivation. After all, he had suffered an attack from Zhao Yameng's anti-spirit bomb, which had sent his gradually recovering cultivation plunging from the early-stage nascent soul realm to the perfected core formation realm. That might still have made him a fearsome foe for any other core formation realm cultivators, but that level of cultivation was clearly not enough when it came to fighting Wang Baoli. The lightning bolts that had wormed out of his body gathered together and formed Wang Baoli's face. His eyes glimmered with a murderous light as he howled at the bloody hand. Waves of spirit energy surged out and froze the illusory bloody hand in its path. Strength drained from the hand, and the lightning bolts that had snaked out from the elder's body re-entered it. Before they re-entered his body, countless lightning bolts had enveloped one of his arms and turned it into dust. The elder was about to go raving mad with terror. He could feel his organs being ripped into pieces by lightning. Madness colored his eyes as he raised his hand and smashed his left head. That was the mystic technique that allowed the never-ending clan to unleash sudden bursts of power. The destruction of one head gave him an additional life, and he had done that consecutively, giving him a greater boost in strength. A second illusory, bloody hand materialized and grabbed through the air again. The combined forces of the two bloody hands finally produced enough power to yank the lightning out of his body and keep them out. "Get out!" the elder roared. His remaining forearms pressed heavily into his chest. A loud boom erupted from inside his body as another two arms burst into dust amidst lightning. He finally managed to force the lightning bolts out from his body. The mass of lightning bolts gathered and formed Wang Baoli's face. It was a bizarre sight to behold. He had finally managed to force Wang Baoli out, but the elder's intense fear didn't wane. He knew that he was still in danger. He retreated hastily, eyes bright with madness, and ignored the ache in his heart as he yelled. "Explode!" The two illusory bloody hands began shining with a blinding, red light instantly. They caved in and exploded. The explosion swept outwards, hitting the lightning bolts that had formed Wang Baoli's face and disintegrating them instantly. What had been Wang Baoli's face turned into a mass of shapeless, formless lightning that fell to the ground. The elder felt no joy in seeing that. His face was still pale. He continued to retreat quickly, not daring to linger. He knew that Wang Baoli could switch places with his avatar with a single thought. He was now weak, his cultivation had fallen to the early-stage core formation realm. The destruction of the two illusory hands, which had been his two heads, had wounded him at the core. He might have been able to reabsorb the spirit energy he had expended and grown back those two heads if he hadn't blown them up, but there was nothing he could do about it now. "Just give me some time. I'm going to eat him alive," the elder thought furiously. Just as he was about to retreat further, an icy voice rang out behind him. "You old wretched thing, I've been wanting to ask you this question. Who gave you the guts to touch my people?" The scattered lightning bolts on the ground rose into the air and gathered together again, transforming into Wang Baoli's avatar. It was like watching someone being born from lightning. Stray lightning bolts hovered in the air around the avatar, painting a terrifying sight. The never-ending clan elder's face turned pale as he retreated even more quickly. Wang Baoli's attacks had clearly struck terror in his heart. He used his remaining pair of hands to form a series of hand seals as he continued fleeing. He was going to sacrifice them in order to escape with his life. He was fast, but Wang Baoli's avatar was formed from lightning. With a single step, countless black lightning bolts shot through the air, roaring towards the elder. Some of them landed on the black pike lying in the distance, yanking it up and then guiding it towards the elder from the opposite direction. The remaining two swords of the tricolored flying swords flew alongside a swarm of lightning bolts, approaching speedily. The elder might have attained an extremely high level of cultivation in the past, but he had since fallen to the early-stage core formation realm after suffering numerous blows. At this moment, he didn't even stand a chance of retaliating against Wang Baoli. He was swamped by lightning bolts almost instantly. As lightning pierced his spasming body, the black pike came whistling by, skewering him through the stomach and nailing him to the ground. 2 flying swords followed, pinning his arms to the ground. He was completely immobilized. Cries of pain echoed in the air. Wang Baoli didn't tear the elder apart immediately from the inside. Instead, he released bolts of lightning out in the open, which hovered in mid-air and transformed into his avatar. Lightning snaked around Wang Baoli's body. The lightning bolts still bound him to the screaming elderly. At that moment, Wang Baoli looked like a god of lightning. Wang Baoli didn't spare the pathetic-looking elder a single glance. He turned towards Zhao Yameng instead. Yameng, did this old wretched creature tell you why he wanted to kill you? What was he planning to do with you? Wang Baoli asked. He had noticed that Zhao Yameng's injuries had come from the draining of her cultivation. They weren't life-threatening, which was why he had allowed himself to focus on capturing the elder instead of tending to her. Zhao Yameng might be drained at the moment, but her character had always been strong. She had forced herself to stay strong when she saw Wang Baoli appear. Weakness was gradually eating at her, but when she looked at Wang Baoli, she could feel a sense of security. It made her feel less weak. Her heart was set at ease. Zhao Yameng turned towards the equally weakened elder when she heard Wang Baoli's question and replied forcefully, "He was going to refine me into a pill." Wang Baoli's solemn face darkened further. He lowered his head and glanced at the trembling elder, then nodded. "Then we'll turn him into a pill instead." Having said that, he raised his right hand and pressed his palm on the elder. Lightning bolts erupted from his person and enveloped the elder instantly. He was going to refine the man with lightning. Screams of agony rang out in the air. Chapter 654, The Sky Collapses. Chapter 654, The Sky Collapses. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Refining a pill required materials, heat, as well as the know-how. However, he was a master of refining artifacts. He trapped the elder with his lightning and continuously sent electricity into the never-ending clan elder's body. He was burning and refining his flesh and blood like he would an artifact. The brutality of his method rivaled that of refining a living person into a pill. Wang Baoli was furious, but he had not yet lost his reason because of his anger. He was refining only the elder's physical body. When the elder's physical form had been turned to ashes by his terrifying lightning, Wang Baoli's right hand, formed from lightning, made a grab at the pile of ashes. It returned with a nascent soul in its grasp. The nascent soul was the elder's, severely weakened and infused with the elder's soul, ready to dissipate any moment. His current level of cultivation wasn't powerful enough for him to search the soul. However, with the Dark Art's secret techniques, he was confident of being able to force some information out of the soul. That being said, he would be doing so with his avatar instead of his true self, which posed a degree of difficulty. The never-ending clan elder might be weak, but the hatred and resignation in his eyes indicated clearly that he wasn't going to spill anything to Wang Baoli easily. Wang Baoli's right hand crackled with lightning, and he conducted a round of interrogation without any results to show for it. After that, he didn't waste any more time on the elder. He sealed the elder with his lightning immortal transformation and flung the sealed soul to Zhao Yameng. Zhao Yameng had recovered partially after taking a few pills and some rest. She formed a series of hand seals and imprinted a few runes on the soul before storing it away in her storage bag. Then, they looked at each other. They could see the solemnity in each other's eyes. I got separated from Elder Feng Churan and the others when the unexpected happened inside the millstone. I didn't manage to locate them, Zhao Yameng said softly. She looked at Wang Baoli. She clearly had many questions on her mind, especially about why Wang Baoli was only here in the form of an avatar. I was hidden inside one of the millstone's cracks. Wang Baoli took a deep breath, looked around cautiously, then told Zhao Yameng everything that had happened to him as well as why his avatar was here. Zhao Yameng listened to his discovery about the third level and the huge pillar that existed underground with a grave expression on her face. It was clear that she was reeling with shock. What was even more shocking was Wang Baoli's sharing of the never-ending clan battle robes and his discovery that they were on a Death Dao battleship. The discovery was beyond anything Zhao Yameng had imagined. Her face turned pale, though her eye remained clear and untainted by confusion or bewilderment. She took a deep breath, and a flicker of light flashed across her eyes before words rushed out from her lips. Baoli, you have to find Feng Churan and let her know the truth. It's clear that there are never-ending clan cultivators hidden in the Dao Palace. The elder was just one of them. This is an extremely serious matter. It's going to affect the entire Dao Palace, as well as the Federation. Baoli, if my guess is correct, a war between the never-ending clan and the Federation is going to happen soon. The Federation is completely unaware of this threat. That will be its greatest disadvantage. Zhao Yameng's face was completely drained of color at that point. Wang Baoli had a dark look on his face as well. He shared her views. In fact, his understanding of their situation might be more well-informed. Wang Baoli narrowed his eyes after hearing her out. Then, he said, Yameng, you're good with array formations. If I can weaken the interference that this place is transmitting, will you be able to make use of that and activate a teleportation? If you can do that, then we must immediately seize the opportunity and escape back to the Dao Palace. We have to inform Sect Lord Shu and the others and get them to return to the Federation as soon as possible. The Federation has to be notified immediately so that they can prepare themselves. Zhao Yameng knew the gravity of the situation. She considered his words, then nodded. I've inherited the Yikang Ancient Array Formation. I can use that and the Teleportation Talisman as the foundation of a short-distance teleportation array formation. Its ability to fight against interference will be boosted. However, you must be able to weaken the interference in the first place for me to do that. Wang Baoli was confident in his ability to do that. His true form was now at the 3rd level, and its progress with absorbing the battle robe's energy was sluggish but steady. The steady weakening of the battle robes, which was the core of this Death Dao battleship, would also result in the weakening of the battleship's ability to disrupt any teleportations. That being said, he needed some time before things progressed to a stage where Zhao Yameng could activate a teleportation. They ironed out the details before setting off together in search of Feng Churan. They kept a lookout for Kong Dao as well. They needed to find Feng Churan to let her know what was going on, while they needed to find the latter so that the three of them could leave together. The 2nd level was a vast world, though. Wang Baoli and Zhao Yameng searched for days without finding any trace of Feng Churan or any of the others. They couldn't advertise their presence loudly either, as their earlier encounter with the never-ending clan elder proved how dangerous this place was. They were wary of everyone else. Even though there was little progress with their search, they were still blessed with good news in other areas. Wang Baoli's progress with absorbing the energy of the battle robes was proceeding well. The battleship's ability to disrupt and interfere with teleportation was gradually weakening. Zhao Yameng had been testing the effectiveness of her teleportation talisman every once in a while during the past few days. The talisman had been shining more brightly and emanating more powerful waves of energy. Based on my calculations, if things go smoothly, I'll be able to forcibly activate the teleportation talisman in a week's time and get us out of this place. The shining teleportation talisman gave Zhao Yameng and Wang Baoli hope. They had discussed earlier. If they still couldn't manage to locate Feng Churan by then, they would hide and teleport themselves away once the interference had been sufficiently weakened. If given a choice between the lives of those in the Dao Palace and the safety of the Federation, both of them would choose the latter. Time passed steadily, and another 3 days went by. Wang Baoli and Zhao Yameng found no traces of anyone else during those 3 days. They sighed and were prepared to give up. They were about to find a hiding place for themselves when suddenly, due to the gradual draining of energy or some other unknown reason, a loud rumbling thundered in the skies. It rang across the vast world and was louder than thunder. It sounded like the heavens themselves were splitting apart. The roaring thunder resonated across the entire world. Wang Baoli and Zhao Yameng were stunned by the unexpected sound. They lifted their faces skywards. In the distant skyline, as an even louder rumble shook the heavens, a sudden gaping rift appeared in the sky. Black winds ripped through the rift and appeared in the 2nd level. As the thundering continued, a 2nd rift, followed by a 3rd rift, appeared. the entire sky was ripped apart within a span of 10 seconds. Deafening rumbling shook the entire world. Earth and rock fell through the rifts, ripping the rifts wider. Large chunks of the sky began to collapse. The sky formed the earth of the first level of this world. As it caved in and black winds emerged through the rifts, the howls of skeletons from the first level could also be heard ringing in the distance. The sight sent Wang Baoli and Zhao Yameng reeling back in shock. Alarm flashed across their faces. Wang Baoli immediately caught the sudden flash of a figure darting through the collapsing sky in the distance. It sped past like a shooting star, as if fleeing from pursuit. It was Mia Liezi. He wasn't headed towards Wang Baoli and Zhao Yameng, he was heading somewhere near them. His clothes were tattered, and he seemed to be in a bad state, his face pale and eyes bright with fury. Blood flowed from his mouth without stop. Another figure flew out from the same rift in close pursuit. He was dressed in a Daoist robe and emanating an ethereal aura. He was Daoist Yuran. Mia Liezi, do you really think you can escape? You have only one option, and that is, to join us. Daoist Yuran smiled. As he stepped out from the rift, a dozen figures dashed out behind him and descended upon this world. Chapter 655, I Will Never Submit. Chapter 655, I Will Never Submit. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Mia Liezi and Daoist Yuran's appearance stunned Wang Baoli. His shock grew when he saw the dozen figures lying behind Daoist Yuran in the next moment. They were all familiar faces. Most of them were nascent Soul Realm cultivators who belonged to both Yuran's and Mia Liezi's factions. Daoist Yuran's disciples Zhu Chudao and Huang Yunshan appeared amongst them. Their faces were dark with solemnity. Most were pale as if suffering from heavy blood loss. Their spirits seemed suppressed. However, they were all standing behind Daoist Yuran, in support of him. Wang Baoli recalled whatever he knew about Daoist Yuran, as well as his instinctive wariness towards the man. The scene before him confirmed his guesses, the truth was right before his eyes. Daoist Yuran had betrayed the Dao Palace. The thought surfaced in Wang Baoli's mind as he witnessed Mia Liezi forming a series of hand seals and pushing as he continued running. The resultant explosion blocked an invisible attack that had been aimed at his retreating back. He was clearly grievously injured. Even though he managed to fight off the attack, blood still found its way out from his mouth. He staggered, then began to laugh almost manically. Yuran, why are you doing this? Daoist Yuran stood in midair, then laughed out loud when he heard that. His laughter was tinged with something dark and unfathomable. He didn't unleash a second attack. Instead, he replied coolly. Mia Liezi, why are you still playing at ignorance? You should have known the answer the moment I ambushed you. Why else would you unleash your most powerful attack in your injured state just so you could escape to the second level? Do you really think that I don't know you're trying to draw Feng Churan over and join forces with her? We've been friends for so long. You can just let me know if you're thinking of stalling for time. I'll let you do it, too. Daoist Yuran smiled and told Mia Liezi. The pained and haggard look on Mia Liezi's face was replaced with something dark when he heard what Daoist Yuran said. The latter had guessed right. He had known the answer when Daoist Yuran had ambushed him. Daoist Yuran had betrayed the Dao Palace. He had immediately thought about the techniques the never-ending clan had possessed in enslaving their opponents when he had witnessed how Daoist Yuran seized control over the majority of Dao Palace cultivators with a strange spell. That was why he had fought with tooth and nail to rip the earth apart and flee to the second level. His goal had been to find Feng Churan, join forces with her, and overpower Daoist Yuran. Daoist Yuran had chosen to ambush him instead of engaging in an open battle with him. That meant that he wasn't so powerful as to be completely invincible. There was still hope. However, Daoist Yuran had just exposed Mia Liezi's intentions. His nonchalance was beginning to make Mia Liezi panic. Wang Baoli and Zhao Yameng were hidden at a nearby mountain while Mia Liezi and Daoist Yuran hovered in midair. They observed the battle with shock and alarm. Having heard what Wang Baoli had discovered on the third level, Zhao Yameng quickly came to a conclusion. There was a great likelihood that Daoist Yuran was involved in the battleship's appearance. In fact, he was likely the mastermind behind this entire thing. The appearance of the earlier never-ending clan elder made it easy to guess Daoist Durant's true identity. Wang Baoli had come to the same conclusion and panicked silently. His true form was frantically trying to suck the battle robes dry. It didn't matter how much spirit fat he was accumulating, nothing mattered as long as he could speed up his absorption of the battle robe's spirit energy. Wang Baoli secretly sped up his absorption rate. In the skies, Mieliez's eyes suddenly flashed with a fierce light. He stared at Daoist Duran, then asked suddenly, "Where's Feng Churan?" "I like your straightforward questions," Daoist Duran smiled and said as he shook his head slightly. "Feng Churan isn't dead. How can I bear letting both of you die? But there's no chance of her arriving in time to help you. She's trapped in an array formation that I've prepared specially for her." Besides, Daoist Duran's eyes narrowed as he took a sudden step forward. Mieliezi retreated immediately. However, Mieliezi was clearly injured seriously. He had reacted swiftly but was still caught up to by Daoist Duran. Explosions rumbled in the air as the two engaged in an aerial battle. The battle was short-lived. Daoist Duran's skin was suddenly torn apart by the emergence of an additional 4 arms, and his 6 hands came together to form a series of hand seals. A black mist materialized and transformed into a huge cauldron that smashed into Mieliezi. Amidst a loud boom, Mieliezi spat out a mouthful of blood. He stumbled and was flung straight into the mountains, which caved in under the sudden force. As Mieliezi struggled to his feet, the huge cauldron turned into countless thin threads that forced themselves into Mieliezi's body. Mieliezi shook violently at the intrusion and spat out another mouthful of blood. His chest began to cave in while one of his arms snapped. He laughed bitterly and fought to lift his head. His eyes were fixed on Daoist Duran. The expression on Daoist Duran's face remained unchanged. He stretched his 6 arms as he got used to them, then smiled. "It's been a while since I revealed my true form. The bodies of Dao Palace cultivators might be much more convenient, but they're too weak." He shook his head as he gazed into the distance, eyes sweeping the horizon. He had noticed the hidden Wang Baoli and Zhao Yameng. They were of no importance. Be it Zhao Yameng or Wang Baoli, they were all mere insects to him. The latter might be an adopted disciple and the 4th Grand Supreme Elder, but that meant nothing at all. What mattered was one's cultivation. At this moment, he only cared about Mieliezi. With a wave of his hand, dozens of silhouettes appeared behind him. They surrounded the grievously injured Mieliezi in a blink of an eye. Daoist Duran walked towards Mieliezi slowly. It was clear from Wang Baoli's eyes that he was struggling to control himself. However, a look of determination soon settled in his eyes. He pulled Zhao Yameng along as he retreated hastily. Mieliezi had noticed their presence, but he didn't spare them a single glance. His eyes remained fierce, but bitterness darkened his heart. He didn't begrudge Wang Baoli's hasty departure. If he had been in Wang Baoli's place, with only a core formation realm cultivation, he would have escaped without hesitation as well. He was bitter because if he hadn't been ambushed and suffered serious injuries, he wouldn't be reduced to such a pathetic state. Daoist Duran had hidden the depths of his cultivation well, and Mieliezi wasn't his match. As he despaired, a fierce light suddenly flashed across Mieliezi's eyes. Daoist Duran shook his head and made a hand seal. Black threads burst out from Mieliezi's body and bound him tightly. Mieliezi shook violently, and the veins on his forehead pulsated. He tried to struggle out of his binds, but to no avail. He could only watch as Daoist Duran strolled leisurely towards him. "Mieliezi, I admire your character. That is why I'm giving you a chance so that you can remain free. Everything you achieved will be for naught if I imprint the slave seal on you. Your mind will be severely damaged. You know that. Besides, the Dao Palace has fallen. There is no hope of it ever rising again. Kneel before me, and I will allow you to become my warrior servant. I promise to replace your physical body after a century has passed so that you may become a true member of the never-ending clan." There was a cold light in Daoist Duran's eyes as he said that. He wasn't lying to Mieliezi. There were 2 people in the entire Dao Palace that he viewed favorably. One was Mieliezi, and the other was his disciple, Dugu Lin. They were the only 2 people whom he felt deserved a chance to join the never-ending clan. He had nothing but disdain for the rest, even Feng Churan, who was at the Soul Conduit realm. She was soft-hearted and thus, weak. Kneel to the never-ending clan? Mieliezi burst out into laughter. It didn't matter that he was currently bound so tightly that pain laced through his body and made him shake uncontrollably with agony. His laughter went on and grew louder. I, Mieliezi, may not be a good man, but I'm a disciple of the Tao Palace. I kneel only to the heavens and the earth and to my Tao Palace ancestors. I kneel to no one else. Who do you think you are? Who does the never-ending clan think they are to believe themselves worthy of me falling to my knees before them? There was mockery in Mieliezi's eyes. He spoke the truth. He wasn't a good man by any standards, but he had his principles. His loyalty belonged to the Tao Palace. His hands might be drenched in blood. He might have thought about sacrificing the entire Federation for his goals. But everything he did for the Tao Palace. His loyalty and devotion to the Tao Palace would never waver. As Mieliezi's voice resonated in the heavens, something flickered in Wang Baoli's eyes. He didn't like Mieliezi at all, but he could sense the resolve in Mieliezi's words. Mieliezi was trying to anger Daoist Yuran into killing him. Daoist Yuran stared at Mieliezi, then narrowed his eyes. He yanked his right hand upwards. The black cloud that was imprisoning Mieliezi suddenly transformed into countless black runes that seared themselves into Mieliezi's body. Mieliezi jerked. He suddenly stopped laughing. All life began to drain from his body. Daoist Yuran formed a series of hand seals. Mieliezi, who had been drained of all life, suddenly lifted his head. His eyes were absent of all consciousness. Since that's the case, you'll simply have to become a slave. Chapter 656, Something's Wrong. Chapter 656, Something's Wrong. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Wang Baoli glimpsed the scene while escaping with Zhao Yameng, and it caused something indescribable to rise inside him. He looked at Mieliezi after the latter raised his head and knew that the real Mieliezi was gone. He might not be dead, but the chances of him awakening again were close to zero. We have to leave this place now. Madness colored Wang Baoli's eyes. His true self, hidden away on the third level, continued draining the battle robes madly. His body began to balloon rapidly. Wang Baoli no longer cared about that. Zhao Yameng was aware of the danger they were in. She kept quiet as she activated an array formation that augmented both hers and Wang Baoli's speed. Even so, they were no match for Daoist Yuran. What made things worse was the many other enslaved cultivators around him. While he didn't go after them personally, with a wave of his arm, 7 to 8 cultivators immediately began chasing after them. I want them captured alive. Daoist Yuran said coolly. He was about to inspect Mieliezi's storage bag when a loud rumbling erupted in the distant sky. It sounded like thunder resonating in the air. The entire second level shook as a strong force rippled through the air. The earth trembled, and the trees and grass shook. Wang Baoli and Zhao Yameng trembled as well as wild winds lashed at their faces. Their pursuers experienced the same wild and strong attack. As the blast surged through the world, a figure appeared in the distant sky. It approached with startling speed, a ruler circling it and giving off a bright light. It was Feng Churan. She seemed to be in a state as bad as Mieliezi had been when he had first appeared on the second level. Her face was pale, and her lips were stained with blood. If Daoist Yuran had spoken the truth and had imprisoned her within an array formation, she must have paid a terrible price escaping its hold. The earlier shock wave must have been caused by the collapse of the array formation. She had been too late, Mieliezi hadn't managed to last until her arrival. As she approached, she saw the unfocused and expressionless look on Mieliezi's face, as well as the smiling Daoist Yuran, who was standing beside Mieliezi. No questions were required. The scene before her, along with her past suspicions about never-ending clan members hidden in the Tao Palace, answered her doubts. Fierce determination flashed across her eyes. She was going to kill Yuran even if that killed her too. With that thought in mind, she charged fearlessly at Daoist Yuran. You managed to destroy my array formation. Feng Churan. I've underestimated you. Daoist Yuran smiled faintly. With a wave of his arm, a vast black cloud emerged from his body and blanketed the skies. He dashed towards Feng Churan. The two were enveloped in a black mist. Loud explosions erupted continuously from within the mist, resonating in the air. Wang Baoli and Zhao Yamen were trapped in a similarly perilous situation. The enslaved cultivators who hadn't received any orders remained standing still. But those who had received orders to pursue them continued racing after Wang Baoli and Zhao Yamen, even while Yuran and Feng Churan engaged in a fierce battle. Of the 8 cultivators, 4 were at the nascent soul realm, and the remaining 4 were at the core formation realm. One of them was Zhu Chu Dao. Wang Baoli would have found it difficult to fight all 8 of them, even with his true form. His chances of winning were next to none with only his avatar. Determination flashed across Wang Baoli's eyes as he hurriedly said, "Yamen, you have to leave first. Find a place and hide, wait for the interference to weaken, and then teleport away immediately." Zhao Yamen was no ordinary woman. She gave Wang Baoli a long, unfathomable look when she heard what Wang Baoli said. Then, without saying anything, she nodded silently. She knew they had no other choice. She raised her right hand to her hair, and, with a wave, cut off a lock of her hair. She handed that to Wang Baoli, then turned and sped off. Wang Baoli's heart flooded with emotions as he held onto Zhao Yamen's lock of hair. He put it away in his storage bracelet, then turned around. A thunderous roar rose to the skies as a sea of lightning erupted around him. His avatar transformed into a vast web of electricity that threw itself over the enslaved cultivators hot on his trail. It ensnared the 8 cultivators instantly, and explosions erupted in the air as the fight commenced. Wang Baoli's avatar was no match for these 8 cultivators. The web that he had formed was instantly torn apart, disintegrating into stray lightning bolts that gathered and transformed into a second electrical web. It didn't shine as brightly as the first, but it was still just as quick as it cast itself over the 8 cultivators. Loud thunderous booms rang out continuously on the land and in the air. The battle between Feng Churan and Daoist Yuran was reaching a pivotal moment. Feng Churan might have her ruler, but she had suffered some backlash from destroying the array formation earlier. In addition, while her cultivation might surpass that of Mieliezi, she was still slightly less powerful than Daoist Yuran, who had taken great pains to hide his true strength. Daoist Yuran was slowly gaining the upper hand in the fight. The battle on land was being lost as well. The electrical web that was formed from Wang Baoli's avatar had been ripped apart 3 times within a matter of seconds. Wang Baoli still had many other dharmic treasures up his sleeve though. Another loud thunderous boom erupted in the air as 8 towering bells appeared over the 8 cultivators and trapped them within. It was but a temporary prison. The 4 nascent soul realm cultivators unleashed their full cultivation and flung the bell off them effortlessly. However, just as they were about to charge out, a black pike came rushing towards them. Flying swords also rained down like a storm, trapping them in another fight. Wang Baoli threw everything he had at them. His avatar managed to hold the 8 cultivators off, giving Zhao Yamen the time she needed to escape. As the battle took place, Wang Baoli's true form continued to sit inside the golden lake on the 3rd level. He had grown extremely fat at this point, but the rate at which he was draining the battle robes didn't slow down. In fact, it sped up. He continued draining the battle robes madly even though it was clear his physical form could no longer absorb any more spirit energy. The draining away of spirit energy had reached a point where it triggered an intense backlash. The battling cultivators felt the battleship quake suddenly. The quaking clearly weakened the interference in the battleship significantly. It wasn't significant enough that Zhao Yamen could activate the teleportation now, but it was only a matter of time before she could do it. In addition, the battleship's quaking seemed to trigger a chain effect. The 1st level and 2nd level of the world began to shake as well. Daoist Yuran had been gaining an edge over Feng Churan, who had been forced back while blood continued to spill from her lips. He had just waved his hand and was about to seize control over and enslave Feng Churan's mind when he suddenly felt the heavens and earth sway, and the interference on the battleship fade. Alarm flashed across his face. Something's wrong. An overpowering sense of unease rose inside Daoist Yuran at that moment. He retreated hurriedly, forming a series of hand seals and extending his senses outward. A few moments later, his eyes widened. His connection with the battleship finally led to his realization of what was happening on the 3rd level. Wang Baoli. Daoist Yuran's breathing quickened, and blood filled his eyes as he let loose a furious howl. He was no longer interested in the severely injured Feng Churan. He turned and charged furiously towards Wang Baoli's avatar. Wang Baoli, who was engaged in a fierce battle with a few nascent Soul Realm cultivators, had no time to react at all. A destructive force descended upon him, and his avatar was blown apart in a deafening explosion. Daoist Yuran looked murderous after destroying Wang Baoli's avatar. With a wave of his hand, he sent a horde of enslaved cultivators after Feng Churan. Thunder boomed as lightning lit the skies around him. Tears began appearing, rips in space that opened into the abyss. 7 to 8 never-ending clan cultivators stepped out of the tears. They were covered with wounds from a past battle, which had not fully healed. Still, their partial recovery placed them at the level of a nascent Soul Realm cultivator. They knew the gravity of the situation, charging at Feng Churan as soon as they appeared. Daoist Yuran burned with anxiety. He unleashed his full speed, racing towards land and heading straight for the third level. Chapter 657, Yuran's Fury. Chapter 657, Yuran's Fury. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. As Daoist Yuran left in a hurry, a pale-faced Feng Churan gritted her teeth and retreated hastily as never-ending clan cultivators and enslaved Dao Palace cultivators charged at her. Her hands came together to form a series of hand seals, and she bit the tip of her tongue and spat out a mouthful of lifeblood. It transformed into a blood mist that surged towards the charging cultivators and stopped them momentarily in their tracks immediately after. Feng Churan frantically raised her right hand and grabbed through the air, snatching the storage bracelet that had been left behind by Wang Baoli's destroyed avatar. Daoist Yuran normally wouldn't leave such things lying behind, but his panic had led to his oversight. Having secured the storage bracelet, Feng Churan retreated without hesitation. The second level might be vast, but she was still filled with despair and weighed down by a heavy heart. She didn't know where she could go and had no idea how to fix this. She turned her head back and stared at the figures of the never-ending clan members behind her. She looked at them and saw the horrible battle scenes that had taken place on the ancient sword during the historic Great Battle. Her mind was filled with the familiar faces of Dao Palace cultivators who had been enslaved and lost a sense of their self. Bitterness engulfed her. She felt like a sinner. Everything is a result of us infiltrating the battleship even though we knew that it was going to be a trap. Feng Churan grimaced. It was then that she realized how much she had failed at being a leader. She had been overly emotional and had ignored reason. Daoist Yuran. An icy glint glimmered in her eyes. She wanted to right the wrongs that she had committed and undo all that had been done, but she was powerless. The bitterness in her only grew as she stared at the cultivators pursuing her. Mieliezi was one of them. There's still hope. Feng Churan tried to stay strong amidst her bitterness. The battleship's ability to interfere with teleportation had been weakened earlier due to reasons unknown, and Daoist Yuran had reacted violently to it. Feng Churan saw a glimmer of hope in that. It was a feeble hope, but hope nevertheless. While Feng Churan continued fleeing, Zhao Yameng was hidden on a mountain in another part of the world, trying her best to form and activate array runes to conceal her presence. At the same time, her hands held tightly onto the teleportation talisman. She calmed her breathing while her eyes shone brightly with determination. She was waiting for the right moment. She was worried about Wang Baoli, but she knew that with her level of cultivation, she would only serve as a distraction instead of an aid to him. She also knew her mission. She had to inform the Federation about everything that was going on here. Baoli, Zhao Yameng murmured to herself, then sighed. She shut her eyes and waited patiently. Feng Churan wasn't the only one engaged in battle on the second level. The cultivators from her faction had been separated when they had entered the second level. Most had perished due to a variety of reasons, while a few had been imprisoned and sealed. Yuran wasn't the only one of the never-ending clan on the battleship. The trap had long been set, and the hunt by the never-ending clan had begun the moment they had boarded the battleship. Many like Kai Lin had either been imprisoned or sacrificed to the millstone. Most of the core formation realm cultivators had perished. This was clearly a much more dangerous place to core formation realm cultivators than their more powerful comrades. They had been no match for their enemies. A few though, like Zhao Yameng, had sensed the threat and gone into hiding. Kong Dao had been one of them. He was skilled at ambushes and concealing himself. Despite the dangers that hid at every corner on the battleship, he had his own way of surviving them. He was someone who had managed to survive the Martian wilderness when he had only been at the ancient Martial realm. He was currently on the second level, but not on the surface. He had found a cavern. There was no golden lake in the cavern, and it was clearly not where Wang Baoli's true form was. However, it possessed a few artifacts that resembled evacuation pods. Many were damaged, but there were a couple that were still functional. Kong Dao hadn't been able to find an exit. Left with no other option, he gritted his teeth and hidden inside one of those evacuation pods to escape pursuit. Everyone was on the run. On the third level, where the battle robes were located, a deafening sound suddenly erupted and rose to the skies. A shockingly fat Wang Baoli sat in the middle of a golden lake. Every part of his body was wobbling, and his eyes shone madly as the devouring seed inside him continued to churn. Faster! Wang Baoli shouted inwardly. He was panicking. There was an incredible well of spirit chi contained inside the battle robes. Even with both the devouring seed and his scabbard hard at work, it was still an incredible amount of spirit chi to absorb. Wang Baoli was only at the perfected core formation realm, so there was a limit to how much he could absorb. With danger looming, he didn't have the time to attempt a breakthrough either. In order to break through from the core formation realm to the nascent soul realm, he needed a safe environment, one free of disturbance in which he could retreat into seclusion. What made things worse was how his progress at draining the battle robes began to slow down as time passed. The battle robe's resistance continued to interfere with Wang Baoli's draining of its spirit energy. This seemed to be the battle robe's natural defense mechanism. Even though Wang Baoli had fully unleashed his devouring seed, that didn't improve the speed in which he was draining the battle robes. Caught in a bind, Wang Baoli frantically formed a series of hand seals and summoned his avatar. His avatar separated from his person and charged upwards into the pillar. Wang Baoli's flame snatcher arch armor materialized. His body had clearly reached its limits, so he was going to get his flame snatcher arch armor to continue the draining. The armor was like Wang Baoli's second body. It joined forces with the devouring seed, and even though it couldn't increase the speed of absorption, it managed to create a balance that allowed vast quantities of spirit chi to continue flowing into the armor. The light emanating from the armor began to grow brighter. Wang Baoli just needed a little more time. It wasn't going to take long, maybe another 2 hours. If he continued absorbing the battle robe's spirit energy at this rate, the interference from the battleship was going to weaken more considerably. Wang Baoli didn't know if it would weaken to a point where teleportation was possible again, but he knew that as long as he kept absorbing the battle robe's spirit energy and weakening the battleship's interference, Zhao Yameng's chances of succeeding would increase. However, the weakening of the battleship's strength had attracted Daoist Durant's notice. He was now cleaving through everything in his path as he raced towards the third level. Wang Baoli's armor had only begun absorbing the battle robe's spirit energy for 20 seconds when the walls of the cavern burst open. Dirt and stone spewed everywhere, and a furious Daoist Duran emerged in the cave. His eyes shot towards the golden lake, where his precious battle robes were, and to the space beside it, where a ballooned-up Wang Baoli, covered in his flame-snatcher arch armor, sat. The Death Dao battle robe's glow had faded considerably. Its skin looked creased, and one of its arms was nothing but drooping skin. Not to mention, Wang Baoli was still draining the battle robe's spirit chi madly. Daoist Duran flew into a mad rage at the sight. His plan to lure the Dao Palace cultivators into the battleship, and enslave them had been to ensure that he could carry out a blood sacrifice with minimal damage. There was no doubt that he was at the Soul Conduit realm and that he had other never-ending clan members reporting to him on the battleship. However, they were all still recovering from their respective injuries. They might be able to survive and win a battle, but prolonged fighting was out of the question. In addition, the battleship lacked the necessary components to meld successfully with the battle robes. It was unable to unleash its full power. The array formation protecting the Dao Palace, as well as Nie Liez's and Feng Churan's strength, meant that Daoist Duran hadn't been confident of his victory. Most importantly, he hadn't been prepared to pay a heavy price for victory. That was why he had laid a trap. He had planned to first enslave them all and then to use the energy harvested from blood sacrifices as fuel for the battleship. In that manner, he would be able to meld with the battle robes any time he wanted. He would be able to steer the Death Dao battleship and invade the Federation, then continue harvesting everyone in the Federation for his sacrifices. Once he had sacrificed the entire Federation to the battleship, he would be able to truly become one with the Death Dao battleship. His plan had been coming along smoothly. To find out that the Death Dao battle robes, which his strategy was centered around, had been drained to such a great extent, was like amputating a limb. The loss was driving him mad with rage. Damn it, how did he get in here? Daoist Duran's eyes turned red, and his head was about to explode. He howled in fury. Wang Baoli. Chapter 658, 10,000 Tribulations and 1,000 Lives. Chapter 658, 10,000 Tribulations and 1,000 Lives. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. The furious howl was louder than thunder. It exploded inside the cave and resonated in the air, causing the walls all around to shake violently and the pillar in the ceiling to spasm. Wild winds whipped across the surface of the Golden Lake, sending violent waves across the surface. It all sent Wang Baoli's heart racing with fear. A red-eyed, crazed-looking Daoist Duran charged at Wang Baoli like a bolt of lightning. He raised his right hand and gathered his soul conduit realm cultivation, forming an incredible power that seemed ready to smash into Wang Baoli, drain him dry of all his spirit chi, and return it back to where it had come from once it crushed the life out of him. The threat of death exploded in Wang Baoli's head. Wang Baoli's eyes widened. He could feel his avatar entering the pillar, heading straight for the second level. He needed only a single thought to exchange places with his avatar and leave this godforsaken place. But Wang Baoli knew that even if he was to escape this time, as long as the battleship's interference continued to disrupt all attempts at teleportation, he wouldn't be able to run away from his eventual death. There was only one way to leave this place, and that was to disrupt the interference from the battleship. The interference had to be severe enough that both Zhao Yamen and he could activate their teleportation talismans and leave. That wouldn't be plausible unless his avatar could locate Zhao Yamen quickly. Time wasn't on his side. These thoughts flashed across Wang Baoli's mind before a determined look settled on his face. He didn't hesitate. When the raging Daoist Duran approached, Wang Baoli yelled suddenly. His flame-snatched arch armor continued draining the battle robes while the spirit fat inside his body began to burn itself up frantically. This was something Wang Baoli had first thought of during his battle with Du Gulin, when his devouring seed had mutated and started sucking madly. He had tried to replicate this move several times but hadn't been able to fully unleash it because he had been too slim. With the sudden accumulation of spirit fat in his body, he had grown so fat that standing had become a challenge. This time, when he unleashed this move, the spirit fat inside his body began to burn, and waves of powerful spirit energy emanated from his body. If someone were to calculate the spirit chi he was giving off right now, they would find that it had surpassed that possessed by a nascent soul realm cultivator. In fact, it rivaled that of Daoist Duran at the moment. However, this wasn't spirit chi that had been acquired through cultivation but something that was stored in his fat. The quantity was there, but the quality was lacking. If one were to describe Daoist Duran's spirit chi as ice, Wang Baoli's would be akin to fog. Regardless of how thick fog got, it remained something that was permeable. Only when transformed into water could it become a form of defense. When transformed into ice, it could even become an offensive measure. Besides that, there was also a difference in degrees of control. Daoist Duran was able to wield the soul conduit realm cultivation inside him flawlessly, allowing his spirit chi to take up all shapes and forms. Wang Baoli, on the other hand, faced difficulty with fine-tuned controls of the spirit chi he was releasing. It was impossible for him to shape his spirit chi smoothly. Wang Baoli knew that, which was why he was simply releasing the vast quantities of spirit chi he got from burning his spirit fat. He wasn't trying to channel it towards any spells or using it to stop Daoist Duran's approach. He only did one thing, and that was to direct the vast spirit chi into his bracelet, into the 6 beads around his wrist. As spirit chi surged into them, 4 of the 6 beads began sucking said spirit chi hungrily like starving vortexes. They shone with a blinding light, each in a different color, red, blue, black and gold. Overwhelming power erupted in the air. The bracelet's beads housed 6 divine powers. They were Wang Baoli's trump card. Even though he couldn't master the control over his spirit chi and use it against his enemy, he could channel it into his bracelet and unleash the divine powers housed inside. Divine powers were sealed inside this bracelet. This meant that the level of cultivation of its wielder determined how powerful each divine power unleashed was. It served as a medium that absorbed the vast ocean of spirit chi that had formed from Wang Baoli burning his spirit fat, which would allow it to unleash even greater power. It was akin to absorbing fog, compressing and distilling it, then turning it into ice blades. This was the only way Wang Baoli could think of to defend himself against Daoist Yuran at the moment. He did his best to burn all his spirit fat, then channel the spirit chi into the bracelet. All the while, Daoist Yuran was charging towards him, bringing down on Wang Baoli the full extent of his fury and the full weight of his soul conduit realm cultivation. He was ready to smash Wang Baoli into dust. It was then that Wang Baoli lifted his head suddenly and spoke. 10,000 tribulations. As soon as the words left Wang Baoli's mouth, one of the star-shaped beads threaded around his right wrist, which had been glowing black, flared brightly. Out flew a black dove. It expanded to the size of the Dharach armor, casting a shadow over everything and charging towards the approaching Daoist Yuran. The raging, charging Daoist Yuran hadn't considered Wang Baoli a worthy foe at all. At that moment though, he couldn't help but shiver when he saw the black dove. He felt as if his soul had been immobilized, and he couldn't move or evade the attack. He was powerless to fight it. This feeling of helplessness surged inside him, alongside a chill whose origin he couldn't explain. He didn't hesitate as he formed a series of hand seals and pointed his finger forward. Black chi materialized in the air before him, transforming into a statue of a never-ending clan cultivator that attempted to crush the black dove. A bizarre sight happened next. Upon collision, the black dove vanished into thin air, without signs of having been injured. But, just as it disappeared, the imprint of a black dove appeared on Daoist Yuran's forehead. It didn't hurt or itch at all, but Daoist Yuran was still shocked by its appearance. He felt an indescribable sense of danger emanating from the imprint. What came along with that was a sudden resistance that unexpectedly rose from inside the golden lake, inside the pillar, from the walls around him, and even the Death Dao battle robes that were still being drained by Wang Baoli. The hostile force erupted, ignoring Wang Baoli and flooding Daoist Yuran. Everything within this cavern suddenly saw Daoist Yuran as an enemy. The golden lake suddenly exploded, and broken limbs flew out, charging at Daoist Yuran. The pillar spasmed, and countless broken fingers darted out and headed for Daoist Yuran as well. That wasn't the end of it all. The walls around began to peel and crack, fragmenting into rocks that flung themselves at Daoist Yuran. Daoist Yuran reeled back in shock from the sudden danger and the bizarre and ridiculous situation he found himself in. He unleashed his full cultivation. With a wave of his arms, he transformed himself into a black tornado that flung the approaching broken limbs, broken fingers, and shattered stone away. Then, he continued his charge towards Wang Baoli. His action seemed to have angered the manifestation of the 10,000 tribulations technique. The black dove on his forehead shone and opened its eyes suddenly. The retaliatory force surrounding him intensified and erupted, and a sudden force erupted from the battle robes and swept across the cavern. Daoist Yuran shuddered, disbelief and shock coloring his face as he stumbled back from the invisible attack. This was Wang Baoli's first attempt at activating 10,000 tribulations. He was shocked at the sight before him. Without hesitation, he unleashed the divine power in the second bead. 1,000 lives. The second star-shaped bead flared with a brilliant light. A familiar warmth surged throughout Wang Baoli's body as a dove-shaped print appeared on his forehead, a sign of how much more powerful this particular unleashing of the technique was compared to its past activations. Wang Baoli felt warm all over, and a sense of acceptance and benevolence surrounded him. The change was most startling where the Death Dao battle robes were concerned. Just a while earlier, Wang Baoli had experienced resistance as it had tried to prohibit him from draining it dry. Wang Baoli had to activate his devouring seed and forcibly absorb its spirit energy. Now though, the resistance had vanished completely. It didn't seem hostile at all, and it was instead welcoming towards Wang Baoli. The transformation shocked Wang Baoli. He was overcome with mad joy the next instant. Excitement colored his eyes, and his spirit soared as surprise and delight overwhelmed him. Little you know what this place is. You're in your daddy's house now. Watch how I'm going to teach you a lesson. Chapter 659, Soul Guiding and Dream Spinning. Chapter 659, Soul Guiding and Dream Spinning. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. The activation of both 10,000 tribulations and 1,000 lives made Daoist Yuran feel unprecedented hostility coming from everywhere in the cavern. Enmity radiated from the broken fingers streaming out from the pillar and from the rocks that always seemed to smash into him. It radiated from the battle robe's overwhelming aura that didn't seem to differentiate friend from foe. Daoist Yuran was completely confounded. He could sense the exact opposite that was happening to Wang Baoli. The entire cavern seemed to revolve around Wang Baoli now. Be it the pillar, the golden lake, or even the battle robes, which had stopped resisting and began to release spirit chi and direct its spirit chi into Wang Baoli's flame-snatcher arch armor. He found it all incredulous and bizarre. That wasn't the worst of it. Wang Baoli had the nerve to give him a derogatory nickname that left a bad taste in his mouth. He had even called himself his daddy. Daoist Yuran's eyes turned red. He was about to go crazy. He howled furiously, unleashed his full soul Condorit realm cultivation, and crashed head-on with the surrounding hostile forces. He seemed fixed on battling the hostile will inside the cavern and charged towards Wang Baoli again. Daoist Yuran was of the never-ending clan and possessed incredibly powerful cultivation. It was clear that he had been even more powerful in the past. The aura that exuded from his person grew murderous amidst the 10,000 tribulations techniques attacks. Wang Baoli's pupils contracted. He formed a series of hand seals and pointed at Daoist Yuran again. Soul guiding. Daoist Yuran had cleaved a path clear to Wang Baoli, sweeping aside all obstacles and fighting against the resistance of the battle robes to arrive hundreds of feet before Wang Baoli. Simmering with rage and frustration, he had raised his right hand with the full intention of turning Wang Baoli into pulp. It was then that Wang Baoli said those two words. His voice echoed in the cavern. The soul-guiding bead on his wrist shone brightly, and a wisp of black smoke emerged from the bead before it expanded to become a gigantic palm spanning hundreds of feet wide. 5 gruesome-looking demons were attached to the hand's 5 fingers. They howled furiously as the hand snatched at Daoist Yuran. It went through empty air. However, Wang Baoli could clearly see another shadow overlaid on Daoist Yuran's person. It was his soul, the one that had been fused with his nascent soul. It had remained fused with his nascent soul for countless years and seemed almost inseparable. The gigantic hand managed to pluck it out, separating it from Daoist Yuran's body. For a few moments, it was torn half a human body's length from Daoist Yuran. His soul was a blur, but his facial features remained distinguishable. The look of shock on his face was clear for all to see. He hadn't expected Wang Baoli to possess such an incredible and shocking mystic technique. If Wang Baoli's cultivation had been at a higher level, and he didn't require the beads to unleash these techniques but had instead activated them with his own will, he would without a doubt pose a threat to Yuran. He would be dangerous even if his cultivation wasn't as powerful as Yuran's. Now though, he still had some way to go. With danger looming over his head, Daoist Yuran ignored the injury caused to himself as he fought to move his body and bite his own tongue. His eyes shone a blood red as he used the pain and the blood in his mouth to unleash some form of mystic technique. His entire body turned red, and fearsome waves of spirit energy erupted from his body as a huge vortex materialized inside his body. It tugged at and gradually dragged his soul back into his body. Just as his soul was about to return to his body and achieve a somewhat unstable fusion with his nascent soul and physical body, a murderous glint flashed across Wang Baoli's eyes. He howled and formed a series of hand seals. Dream spinning. Soul guiding to shock one's soul and dream spinning to draw one's spirit. The final star-shaped bead around his wrist began to spark brightly as soon as he shouted the 2 words. A force that seemed all-encompassing, that was present all around them in the universe, suddenly stirred. It seemed to originate from the essence of all life and came from a mysterious place hidden in the depths of one's soul. Wang Baoli didn't really understand what was going on. The Federation had proven the mysterious power of dreams before the Spirit Inception era. Since the beginning of time, many people had the same experience of déjà vu, where he or she had felt as if something that had just happened had also taken place in their dreams. They had only managed to arrive at a vague and indistinct answer to this mystery after they had entered the spirit inception era. There was a mysterious power in this universe that was all around them. It resonated with a place deep inside every living creature's soul and resulted in a strange echoic effect. If someone were able to wield this power, he or she would be able to achieve Tao via dreams. He or she would be able to control the essence of dreams. He or she would be able to unleash a power similar to that of the dark dream. Dream spinning gave one similar power. It couldn't compete on a macro scale, but it had the edge on a micro scale. Its principles revolved around drawing the mysterious power found within the dreamscape and circling the bespelled, forming a ring around the person's body. A single ring represented a dream, while 2 rings represented a dream within a dream. When fully unleashed, one could form 9 rings, 9 dreams within dreams. One could seize control of the essence of all dreams and kill someone within a dream. However, with Wang Baoli's current level of cultivation, even if he were to channel all that vast spirit chi into the bead, he wouldn't be able to unleash the full powers of dream spinning. He was only capable of summoning a single ring now. As the technique was activated, countless shades of crystal appeared around Daoist Yuran soundlessly. They seemed illusory, yet upon closer look, appeared to possess physical form. They formed a ring around Daoist Yuran. He didn't seem to notice as the ring of shards closed around him. This was because he was struggling to regain his soul, and also because of how powerful the dream spinning technique was. Within the blink of an eye, the crystal shards formed a complete circle around him. Daoist Yuran jerked suddenly, then fell limp. He hovered in mid-air, unmoving. His spell that was meant to stabilize his soul faded away. It was as if he had just been forcibly yanked into a dream. Wang Baoli had no idea what sort of dream it was, as he wasn't yet capable of entering Daoist Yuran's dream at this moment. But, he knew that this was his chance. Wang Baoli's eyes flashed as he looked at the Death Dao battle robes. He had drained one of its arms dry, and now, its remaining arm was showing signs of drooping as the Dharach armor continued to absorb its spirit energy. Wang Baoli could use the chance that the dream spinning had given him to continue draining the battle robes, but he wasn't certain how long the dream spinning technique would last. He didn't like leaving his fate to chance. If he had a choice, he would rather be the master of his own fate. There was a determined look in his eyes as he stopped draining the Death Dao battle robes decisively and leaped into the air. His Dharach armor glimmered as his right hand tightened into a fist. As his cultivation churned, unimaginable power erupted from his skeletal divine armament and surged outwards. He blurred in the air with a sudden burst of speed and appeared next to Daoist Yuran, his fist headed straight for the latter's head, which was held immobile in mid-air. A flying sword with a lethal glint dashed out from the pillar, moving as swiftly as Wang Baoli, and headed towards Daoist Yuran's Dantian. Wang Baoli had lost all connection with the sword when he had entered the 3rd level and fallen inside the pillar. He had ached for the loss of the artifact despite his attempt at retrieving it. The connection with the flying sword had been re-established after he had unleashed 10,000 tribulations and 1,000 lives, and after he had triggered a flood of broken fingers streaming out of the pillar. He hadn't activated it then, waiting until now to unleash its full power. Die! Wang Baoli gritted his teeth as he unleashed the full power of his Dharach armor and channeled it into his divine armament. A blow from his divine armament would be enough to kill an early-stage or even mid-stage nascent soul realm cultivator. Daoist Yuran might be at the soul conduit realm, but Wang Baoli was confident of his ability to inflict a grievous injury on the former if he coupled the attack with his flying sword. Wang Baoli darted out. It was then that Daoist Yuran's eyes began showing signs of struggle. He was about to awaken. Chapter 660, I'm not playing anymore. Chapter 660, I'm not playing anymore. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. The cultivation of Daoist Yuran, or the never-ending clan member who was using Daoist Yuran's body, to be more specific, at his peak had clearly surpassed the soul conduit realm. He might have been at the spirit immortal realm, or perhaps even at the planet realm. The past war had left him severely injured, and his recovery since then had been slow, which was why the strength he was able to unleash now was only at the soul conduit realm. That was why even though Wang Baoli had unleashed soul guiding, dream spinning, 10,000 tribulations, and 1,000 lives and earned himself a small window of opportunity, he still couldn't underestimate Daoist Yuran's fighting instincts when placed in such grave danger. Daoist Duran's eyes were showing signs of struggle and awakening, causing the look of determination in Wang Baoli's own eyes to grow stronger. He didn't waver and consider retreat. Instead, he moved more quickly and more decisively. His cultivation churned more fiercely, and he seemed to be unleashing his full potential. He was like a shooting star encircled by lightning bolts, approaching Daoist Duran instantly. In the blink of an eye, Wang Baoli and his flying sword appeared next to Daoist Duran. The skeletal fist of his flame snatched the arch armor was about to land on Daoist Duran's head when the latter suddenly exploded. The deafening explosion resonated in the air as Wang Baoli's flying sword pierced through Daoist Duran's dantian from his back. Blood splattered in the air. There was no joy on Wang Baoli's face. Instead, alarm flickered in his eyes as the threat of danger rose inside him. His entire body was screaming for him to get away immediately. He gritted his teeth and raised his right fist again, his cultivation erupting. He planned to drive a second punch into Daoist Duran. It was too late. Wang Baoli's earlier fist might have appeared to have landed on Daoist Duran's head, but he knew that Daoist Duran's head had exploded on its own when his fist was a mere inch away from it. He wasn't the one who had blown it up. Daoist Duran had blown his own head up. Daoist Duran, who hadn't managed to awaken in time to save himself, had decided to blow a part of his body up instead. He had chosen to blow up a part of his host body. He made use of the sudden explosion to defend himself against Wang Baoli's punch, saving himself from death. Wang Baoli still managed to injure Daoist Duran though. His flying sword had come out of nowhere, and Daoist Duran hadn't expected it at all. There was no way he could have expected a flying sword shooting out from the pillar at such a critical moment. That was why, even though he made use of his own physical body as a defense against Wang Baoli's punch, he was still injured by the flying sword that had pierced his dantian from the back. However, even though this might be considered quite a serious injury where Daoist Duran was concerned, Wang Baoli obviously hadn't thought it grievous enough. The sense of danger had exploded inside his head, and he wanted to unleash a second attack. But 3 lumps of flesh had appeared on the blooded stump where Daoist Duran's head had been. There were no facial features on the 2 lumps on each side. They looked like featureless piles of flesh that were both gruesome and a fearsome sight to behold. The lump in the middle looked slightly more palatable, as it had a pair of eyes on it. However, it was skinless, and its mouth was mere bone. It looked terrifying. This was Daoist Duran's true form. Forearms burst out from his body at the same time the 3 fleshy lumps appeared. One arm shot forward in a blur and caught Wang Baoli's flying sword, while the remaining arms came together to form a flurry of hand seals before throwing their hands towards Wang Baoli. An incredible force of destruction at the Soul Conduit realm erupted at that moment. It transformed into a powerful hurricane that seemed capable of destroying everything in its path and swept towards Wang Baoli. The hurricane resembled a black, spinning sphere. It expanded to the size of Wang Baoli's flame-snatched arch armor in the blink of an eye and seemed about to swallow the later whole. Wang Baoli's head buzzed, and his mind turned blank. He dared not allow any thoughts to enter his mind. The first thought that did would arise from pure instinct, and he would immediately switch places with his avatar. But that would only delay his eventual death. It might not even give him that much more time. He would have maybe another 10 seconds before death caught up with him, and he would also lose any chance of teleporting away. Daoist Duran would be able to seize control and continue with his evil plans. He had no choice. Wang Baoli's eyes had turned completely red. The destructive and violent hurricane was on the verge of tearing his arch armor apart, and his own body was being squeezed to the point of implosion. He howled and once again unleashed a self-destructive mystic technique. It was a reversal of his absorption of spirit chi, the breaking down of his spirit fat. Typically, Wang Baoli wouldn't replicate such a technique within such a short span of time. However, there was no time to think of another solution. His fat shook as he howled. It burned and vanished within the blink of an eye, the spirit chi housed within it erupting and surging into the arch armor. He pulled back his fist and raised his other arm to block Daoist Duran's attack. The spherical hurricane surged forward like a raging tsunami, rushing at Wang Baoli and unleashing its full force at him. Cracks appeared on Wang Baoli's armor instantly. In the next moment, the armor, as well as Wang Baoli's inner protective clothing, shattered. He spat out a mouthful of blood as his body was flung backwards. But, he had successfully survived the attack. More than half of the armor was shattered, his inner protective clothing was completely destroyed, and he suffered severe injuries. However, his unleashing of his mystic technique and his spirit chi, as well as the buffer provided by the divine armament arm, had allowed him to survive the blow. In addition, Daoist had been severely injured by his flying sword. This attack had been made hastily, and it hadn't been his most powerful. Wang Baoli's body was flung backwards. He landed next to the battle robes in the middle of the lake, blood flowing from his lips. He was still alive, but he could fight no longer. There was only one option left to him: he had to switch places with his avatar. This would allow him to stay alive for a few moments longer. The difference in power between them was too great. It had been a miracle that Wang Baoli had even managed to hold his ground for so long, forcing Daoist to blow his body up and injuring the latter with his flying sword. If someone were to find out about this, they would be utterly shocked. It would be completely unbelievable. Daoist had a cause to be so infuriated. His rage was beyond measure, and he was beside himself with fury. It was simply unimaginable that his plans had been thwarted by Wang Baoli. The battle robes had been drained to the point of losing 2 arms, and he himself had had to maim his host body and had suffered additional injuries. When he finally regained his mind again, the fury in his eyes seemed almost tangible. He howled at Wang Baoli and made a grab for him. "Wang Baoli, I'm not going to give you an easy death. I'll extract your soul and make you bear witness to the destruction of your lowly civilization. Daoist promised as he made a grab for Wang Baoli. It was then that Wang Baoli, panting and with blood still flowing from his lips, shouted in a shrill voice. "You dare kill me? My senior brother is Chen Qing, the first divine king of the never-ending clan. I am his only junior brother. My senior brother won't let you off if you kill me. It doesn't matter how far you run or where you run to, he'll find you. When he does, you're dead." Wang Baoli's voice was shrill. He wasn't even doing it on purpose. He didn't even think about the people who had uttered similar threats to him before he had killed them. It was as if this ability had been hidden inside him all along. His words didn't feel strange on his lips at all. They rolled easily off his tongue. I'm here because of some shitty training my senior brother wanted me to undergo. To think that someone as important as me is having my ass kicked by someone like you. I'm not playing anymore. I'm the junior brother of a divine king. I must be nuts, fighting to the death with someone like you. Chapter 661, Save Me, Senior Brother. Chapter 661, Save Me, Senior Brother. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Wang Baoli's eyes were wide, and blood flowed from his mouth non-stop, but his presence remained overpowering. In fact, it grew stronger as he kept talking. This isn't fun at all. When I was in the Mi Luo forest, I rode on Starfang beasts and had everything I wanted. I wouldn't be here if not for my senior brother ordering me to train here. Wang Baoli sat up and pulled out 2 Starfang beast cores as he spoke. He started sucking at one to heal himself while using the other to rub his wounds. He had left his storage bracelet with his avatar, but it was mainly used to store his dharmic armaments. Other precious materials had been split across his various storage bags. Wang Baoli had learned his lesson: one could never have too many storage bags. He sucked at the beast core after pulling it out and stared angrily at Daoist. "You are ***. I must have knocked myself on the head too hard. There are so many planets I could have ended up on and had fun on. Why did I choose the vast expanse Dao Palace?" Wang Baoli glared at Yuran while sucking hard on the Starfang beast core in his hand. His words echoed in the cavern. Daoist, who had been charging at Wang Baoli, suddenly stopped in his tracks after hearing what Wang Baoli had just said. His eyes widened. It was as if he had just seen a ghost. He reported to the second Divine King and clearly knew of the first Divine King of the never-ending clan. He knew how terrifying and powerful the man was. His heart had skipped a beat when he had first heard "First Divine King" come out of Wang Baoli's mouth. After recovering from the initial shock, his first reaction was that of disbelief. He didn't rank high in the never-ending clan's hierarchy. He only knew of the first Divine King and not the latter's true name. Wang Baoli might have been able to put together a somewhat convincing lie, but someone from the Federation shouldn't have been able to evoke the name of Mi Luo Forest. Wang Baoli had said it so easily. He had pulled out his Starfang beast cores just as easily. That had shocked Daoist as well. He immediately recognized those as beast cores belonging to beasts of the spirit immortal realm. Such cores were priceless. Mi Luo Forest was renowned for being protective of its kind, but Wang Baoli had been able to pull out 2 such cores, for distractions. With his full speed unleashed, he charged brashly into one hex after another, passing them one by one. The hexes lost their effect as soon as Wang Baoli approached, allowing him to pass through before reactivating themselves again. Wang Baoli approached his destination rapidly. Daoist, on the other hand, possessed powerful cultivation that allowed him to force his way through hexed areas. Even should the hexes explode around him, the resultant damage was minimal. However, there were still too many of them, which caused some delay. His speed, which should have surpassed Wang Baoli's, was slightly reduced because of that. In addition, the sword body was governed by chaotic laws that led to great uncertainty during teleportations. Daoist was forced to rely on his spells as he conducted his pursuit. He could only narrow the distance between him and Wang Baoli, unable to reach him in an instant. The distance between him and Wang Baoli narrowed as he chased after the latter anxiously. When he finally saw Wang Baoli in the distance, he gritted his teeth and chose to teleport instead of charging through the hexes. He vanished, then reappeared less than 100 feet behind Wang Baoli, his face pale. He hastily waved his hand and made a grab at Wang Baoli before retreating hurriedly. The space he had stood at earlier immediately caved in. Numerous, gaping tears in space appeared, ready to rip everything apart. Even though Daoist was a powerful cultivator, he still gasped at the sight. Wang Baoli raised his right hand in a wave, sending a dharmic armament out behind him that self-destructed. The shock waves collided with Daoist grab. Wang Baoli spat out another mouthful of blood. Daoist attack had been hasty, and he had managed to block it successfully with his dharmic armament, but the backlash still managed to aggravate his existing injuries. Wang Baoli didn't slow down though. Instead, he picked up his pace and formed a series of hand seals while he continued to run. Numerous spheres of electricity materialized. He flung them into the hexed areas that he passed by, blowing them up and triggering a series of explosions as the hexes blew up in his wake. His intention was to create obstacles in Daoist path as well as to stir more chaos. The sword body was already filled with chaos, like a volcano on the verge of eruption. What Wang Baoli was doing was adding fuel to the fire, intensifying the chaotic elements and inflaming the sea of fire. Wang Baoli. The expression on Daoist face was dark and stormy. He had to dodge some of the explosions, which in turn widened the distance between him and Wang Baoli. He dared not teleport easily now. He had struggled with his earlier attempt and nearly landed where he hadn't wanted to due to the chaotic laws of this place. Even though he had forcibly changed his landing, that had led to a spatial collapse. After his shock, he had learned to be more cautious. Chapter 665, Killed. Chapter 665, Killed. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. His caution led to reduced speed in his pursuit. The repressed resentment he experienced while inside the battleship surfaced again. His cultivation clearly surpassed Wang Baoli vastly, but Wang Baoli was like a slippery eel that constantly slipped out of his reach. He had been so close to killing Wang Baoli earlier, but Wang Baoli had managed to escape. Even though he had been injured grievously, he hadn't passed out. In fact, he continued to release numerous lightning spheres while running away, triggering multiple hexes in the sword body and creating greater chaos. Despite his Soul Conduit realm cultivation, Daoist had to proceed with great caution. Wang Baoli. Daoist was beyond infuriated. He was panicking as well. He couldn't leave the battleship for long, as there were too many things he still needed to attend to in the battleship. The longer he got delayed here, the greater the impact he would face when trying to repair whatever damage had been done to his plans. Amidst his panic, a look of determination settled in Daoist eyes. Ahead of him, Wang Baoli continued running away. His mind was going blurry. If not for the green lotus inside his body, right hand, and tightened it into a fist. He could feel a fearsome power gathering in his fist even though he hadn't activated his cultivation. His excitement intensified. Even though he still wouldn't be a match for Daoist Duran, based on Daoist Duran's performance in their last fight, Wang Baoli was certain that he wouldn't end up in as terrible a state as before. To think that I managed to acquire a nascent soul realm physical body just by entering the first palace. Wang Baoli took a deep breath as he stared at the first palace. He noticed that the red glow rising above the palace had dimmed considerably, and frost had begun to creep back around the palace. It seemed that it was going to be sealed again. Wang Baoli sighed with regret. Even though the trial he had just undergone seemed pretty simple and straightforward, Wang Baoli still shivered when he remembered the pain he had experienced in the 10,000 spirit blood pool. The constant drilling of the blood chi and the mental backlash from the countless dead beasts had inflicted great pain on Wang Baoli. He felt as if he had really died tens of thousands of times. It's a pity I didn't last as long as I wanted. Else, based on the scale of the 10,000 spirit blood pool, I might have reached the soul conduit realm or even the spirit immortal realm. In fact, it might even be possible to acquire a planet realm physical body. Maybe that's for the best. I should be able to find my way back here after I've become more powerful. I can try to absorb the nutrients in the lake then and attain another breakthrough. Wang Baoli licked his lips. He had gotten addicted to such breakthroughs. His heart was filled with anticipation. After a moment, his eyes turned towards the other two palaces encased in ice. I wonder if I can enter the other two palaces. Wang Baoli's eyes flashed at the thought. He walked over for a closer look. The ice encasing both palaces showed no signs of melting, and the earlier icy voice didn't make a reappearance. Does this mean I'm not qualified to enter? Wang Baoli scratched his head. He had discovered how the rules worked, but he wasn't prepared to just leave. He made a few rounds around the palaces. Then, his eyes landed on the palace on the right. The light in his eyes grew brighter and warmer as he examined the palace. The palace on the right was the same size as the one on the left. However, the carvings decorating it were significantly more complex and detailed. It was clear that the access rights required for one to enter that palace were greater than those granted to an adopted disciple. Wang Baoli's heart itched at that thought. After a long while, he finally clenched his jaw, then raised his right hand abruptly. He unleashed his full cultivation, as well as the full power of his physical body, and sent his fist flying into the ice encasing the palace on the right. Shatter! Wang Baoli roared. A hurricane filled with destructive force gathered in his raised right fist. Its power surpassed that of Wang Baoli's flame-snatched arch armor. The blow landed on the ice, but it was like sinking a pebble into the vast ocean. A muted thud sounded, and the ice remained undamaged. There wasn't even the slightest crack on it. Wang Baoli panicked. He was about to throw another punch when a purple lightning bolt suddenly appeared in the ice after the latter had absorbed the force of his first punch. The bolt of lightning snaked through the ice, appeared before Wang Baoli in the next moment, and exploded in his face. There was an explosive roar as Wang Baoli shuddered and stumbled back from the force of the explosion. He was pushed back 1,000 feet before he finally caught his balance. His breathing uneven, he lifted his head and stared. The palace and the ice around it remained untouched, and the purple lightning bolt had long dissipated. The only thing that remained was the fear pumping through Wang Baoli's veins. That had been a warning. If he continued attacking the palace, he wasn't going to get another warning. He would be placing his life on the line. That's hardly charitable. Wang Baoli eyed the palace on the right, resentment building up inside him. Chances were, the palace hadn't allowed him entry because his rank or his level of cultivation wasn't high enough. If I were a Dao disciple. Wang Baoli stood there, contemplating. Then, a strange light flickered in his eyes as an idea popped into his head. I might not be a Dao disciple, but I have an arm that might have belonged to one. At that thought, Wang Baoli took a deep breath before pulling out the skeletal divine armament arm from his storage bag. He held it in his hand, unleashed his full cultivation, and allowed his cultivation to surge into the broken limb. The divine armament arm began shining with a blinding light, exuding incredible power. As soon as the fearsome power erupted from the divine armament arm, The palace on the right began to tremble under Wang Baoli's nervous gaze. The tremors went on for a short while, then stopped completely. Maybe the energy released from the arm isn't powerful enough? Wang Baoli frowned. He thought for a bit and concluded that it hadn't been powerful enough. In addition, his connection with the skeletal arm wasn't as perfect as he would like. Determination colored Wang Baoli's eyes. He gave up the idea of injecting more cultivation into the arm. Instead, he sat down. He was going to make a new Arch armor based on the traditional refinement method. That wasn't difficult at all. The challenge lay in unleashing the Arch armor inheritance's true power. He had to fuse the Arch armor with the flame snatch technique in order to do so. That had been the results of Wang Baoli's study, to combine the two in a complementary way that augmented their strengths. The flame snatch technique required a vast quantity of vitality, though. This would prove difficult to acquire at this point in time. However, he was confident of his success if he were only to remake a new Arch armor. Having learned from his past experience, it took Wang Baoli only 2 weeks before illusory, blood-colored meridians began to emerge from his body. That was the first layer of the Arch armor. Its strength and power could hardly compare to the first Arch armor he had before, but it would serve its purpose of fusing the skeletal arm with the armor. The meridians wormed inside the skeletal divine armament arm under Wang Baoli's commands. Without any hesitation, he unleashed his cultivation again. His spirit energy flowed through the meridians and entered the divine armament arm. Waves of spirit energy began to emanate from the arm as its power was once again activated. At that instant, the palace on the right started shaking again, and the same icy voice pierced the air again. As a Tao disciple, you are qualified to shoulder the responsibility of rebuilding the Tao Palace. You may access the second spiritual palace for a chance to achieve phenomenal breakthroughs in your cultivation. Chapter 672, Forbidden. Chapter 672, Forbidden. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. I did it. Excitement filled Wang Baoli when he heard those words. His heart started racing. The exhilaration that he felt at that moment surpassed what he felt when he had unlocked the first palace. After all, he gained entry to the first palace based on his credentials. His entry to the second palace, on the other hand. It was because of my hard work. Wang Baoli jutted his chin out proudly as he watched the ice encasing the second palace shatter and fall to the ground. Then, a blue light burst from the palace and rose to the heavens. Waves of energy rippled in the air, and the earth trembled. Its tremors were fiercer than when the first palace had been unlocked. Despite his nascent soul realm physical body, Wang Baoli was still forced to retreat thousands of feet away. He waited for the series of shock waves, powerful as a tsunami, to flood the area and slowly dissipate. Then, quieting the excitement in his heart, he began to approach rapidly. He soon reached the front of the palace and eyed the crack between the doors and the blue light spilling from the opening. Grinning happily, and filled with excitement and anticipation, Wang Baoli took a step in. A familiar sensation washed over him. When his vision cleared, he saw himself standing in a familiar spot, in an area similar to that of the first palace. The statues and the interior architecture were all familiar sights. Only this time, the bead was emanating a blue light. Below the bead sat a figure. He wasn't the elder from the first palace. This time, it was a middle-aged man with an expressionless face. He glanced over at Wang Baoli. It didn't give Wang Baoli the same feeling as when the other elder had looked at him. He didn't feel like he was being seen through. Instead, an instinctive terror unfurled inside him. The man before him seemed to possess terrifying, unimaginable power. Wang Baoli's breathing quickened, and he hurriedly lowered his head in greeting. "Senior, greetings, I'm disciple Wang Baoli." The man didn't speak, he only stared coldly at Wang Baoli. Wang Baoli had no idea if he was looking at him or if he was looking through him, at the skeletal divine armament arm that Wang Baoli had put away. His silence made Wang Baoli nervous. As his imagination ran wild with panic, the middle-aged man suddenly spoke. "This palace allows one to overcome all barriers to one's breakthrough in cultivation. If you are able to pass the trial with your current level of cultivation, you may make full use of the palace to reach the nascent soul realm. The vast expanse Tao Palace has in its records 938 different varieties of nascent souls, which have been collected through the ages. Should you pass the trial, you may select one from a range of souls determined by the results of your trial, the man said coldly, his face devoid of any emotion. His voice was different from the one Wang Baoli had heard outside, but they were similar in their lack of emotion and their robotic quality. Wang Baoli had realized earlier that the middle-aged man was also an illusion, like the elder in the first palace. Despite his knowledge of dharmic armaments, he wasn't able to discern how these three palaces were being operated, but he could somewhat tell that both the elder and the middle-aged man were likely artifact spirits. The middle-aged man's words continued to resonate in the air amidst Wang Baoli's contemplation. The souls you will be given a choice of are dependent on your performance and luck. If you manage to endure the force of my spirit energy for 10 counts, you will be qualified to select any soul that is not the 10 most powerful souls in our records. If you last for 20 counts, you will be able to choose any of the 10 most powerful nascent souls. 60 counts, and you will have the right to decide if you wish to attempt to master the only legendary nascent soul the vast expanse Dao Palace possesses, the stellar nascent soul. The stellar nascent soul? Wang Baoli's eyes widened when he heard that. He suddenly recalled what he had read up on about nascent souls during his time at the Dao Palace. There were many different types of nascent souls to be found in the Dao Palace. The nascent soul realm was also considered an important stage that divided the great realms. The evolution from core to nascent soul was akin to the formation of a second life. It would drastically transform a cultivator. The key to this transformation was the quality of one's nascent soul. The better the quality, the greater the impact to and transformation of a cultivator. Wang Baoli learned from his initial research that if one were to exclude a cultivator's mystic techniques and dharmic treasures, and look solely at the cultivator's cultivation when considering his battle prowess, one could set said level of cultivation as a basic unit. The quality of one's nascent soul would determine how many times this basic unit was multiplied to determine how powerful this cultivator was in battle. The consequent power that was going to be unleashed in battle would, of course, differ depending on the number of times this basic unit was multiplied. The difference in a nascent soul's quality could result in a vast difference in power. A nascent soul's quality dictated how well it would fuse with nomological laws. That, in turn, determined one's strength in battle and consequently, one's future in the world of cultivation. Most importantly, Wang Baoli remembered the Dao Palace mentioning something in their records. There were 5 extremely rare types of nascent souls that were found across the countless civilizations in the universe. They were deemed legends. The original vast expanse Dao Palace had gotten its hands on one of them through sheer luck. However, records in the current vast expanse Dao Palace stated that this legendary nascent soul had been lost. Wang Baoli had asked Little Missy about that nascent soul, but she had told him not to be overly ambitious. It was clear to Wang Baoli that she knew nothing about the nascent soul. That was why Wang Baoli had been overcome with excitement when he had heard the middle-aged man mention the legendary nascent soul, the stellar nascent soul. He burst out into excited laughter before the man could finish speaking. I choose the stellar nascent soul. Wang Baoli's eyes shone brightly. He was afraid of the potential repercussions that he might have to deal with for cheating his way in. To prevent any unhappy repercussions, he immediately started reciting the sutra in his head after declaring his choice. He had made up his mind, he wasn't going to rely on his own hard work this time. His firm belief was that he had worked hard to get to where he was now. Everything he had now had been the result of his own blood, sweat, and tears. The occasional reliance on external help wasn't against his principles. Wang Baoli recited the sutra excitedly. The skies began to thunder, and the palace began to shake as a presence that came from the deepest part of the universe descended upon them, sending the entire ancient sword quaking. It landed inside the palace and weighed heavily down on the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man's eyes widened. He didn't fight back or struggle. He shut his eyes, extended his senses, then opened his eyes again. There was a strange look on his face as he looked at Wang Baoli and nodded. You pass. Wang Baoli had been fraught with anxiety until he heard those words. Excitement overwhelmed him. He was about to say something when the middle-aged man gave him a deep, unfathomable look. I should have expected this from someone who entered with a Tao disciple's aura. I admire your courage. To think that you actually dared to select the legendary nascent soul, the forbidden art that almost no one has managed to master. What? Wang Baoli, who had been bouncing with excitement, was stunned to hear those words. He gasped at the mention of forbidden art. He had a bad feeling about this. Before he could question the man in detail, the latter lifted his right hand and pointed at Wang Baoli. You will get what you wished for. Proceed with your breakthrough, the man said, not giving Wang Baoli any chance for regret or argument. Starlight shot out from his finger and darted into Wang Baoli's forehead. Wang Baoli felt an explosion in his head, and his vision blurred. He felt as if his feet had left the ground and he was being swept upwards by the starlight, towards the heavens. He shot through the skies and into space. Around him was an unfamiliar patch of space, an illusion. Stars sparkled brightly around him. Before he could regain some clarity in his mind, vast amounts of information about how to refine the stellar nascent soul suddenly flooded his brain. Information about the nascent soul surged into his head, and his understanding of this nascent soul grew clearer. As his knowledge about the nascent soul grew, the waves of emotions inside him surged. He couldn't control his tragic scream in the end. I don't want to practice this anymore. I made a mistake. I was wrong, really wrong about this. I don't want to learn this anymore. Little Missy, senior brother, save me. The stellar nascent soul, one of the 5 great legends of the entire universe, had been acquired by the vast expanse Tao Palace through luck. The Tao Palace had realized how extreme the cultivation method of the soul was and labeled it a forbidden art. The theory required having the cultivator extract his golden core, and initiate a collision with a planet that had been melded with a powerful planet realm cultivator. Failure would result in the destruction of the core and the cultivator's death. Success would result in the birth of a stellar nascent soul. Chapter 673, The Stellar Nascent Soul. Chapter 673, The Stellar Nascent Soul. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. What kind of stupid legend is this? Choosing this nascent soul is pure suicide. Wang Baoli gnashed his teeth and whined secretly. Tons of information about the stellar nascent soul flooded his brain, gradually expanding his understanding about the planet realm. Based on what Wang Baoli had first studied in the Dark Sect's records, the planet realm was the first great realm at the perfected stage that a cultivator could achieve. It was the first ultimate stage, after the nascent soul, soul conduit, and spirit immortal realms. Cultivators at this realm were unimaginably powerful in both spirit and flesh. After organizing the information that he had obtained during his time at the Dark Sect and what he learned about the stellar nascent soul, Wang Baoli was able to piece together a somewhat comprehensive picture about this perfected realm. The planet realm was named as such because all spirit immortal realm cultivators who wished to achieve a breakthrough in cultivation, and enter this first perfected realm had to meld with an actual planet in space. One might even call it a devouring of a planet. The cultivator was to turn the planet into a part of him. The planet would rest inside his body and become the Tao foundation through which the cultivator may ascend to the stars. Legends spoke of many civilizations calling this step the ascent. That was why every powerful planet realm cultivator could be considered an actual planet. The process of devouring and melding with a star was extremely challenging, and failure would result in death. It was a vast chasm that a cultivator had to bridge in his journey of cultivation. In addition, the size of the planet, its caliber, and any other unique qualities it might possess, including its hidden stores of energy, determined how powerful the planet realm cultivator would be. A strong planet realm cultivator could have their way in the universe. They could challenge an eternal star realm cultivator and remain glorious in defeat. A weak planet realm cultivator would only be able to bully weaker cultivators at cultivation realms lower than theirs. They would find cultivators at the same realm to be difficult opponents. As these thoughts flooded Wang Baoli's brain, he was on the verge of tears. He knew that he couldn't blame anyone else for his current predicament. His own talent and genius had landed him in such trouble. They had inspired the Tao disciples' palace to jealousy and led it to increase the difficulty of his attempt to break through to the nascent soul realm. Regret filled his heart, but there was nothing he could do about that now. Trapped in a starless abyss, he felt waves of spirit energy ripple around him. In the distance, the abyss stretched on forever. An overpowering, destructive force, which seemed capable of wiping everything out and made his scalp prickle and his entire body shudder involuntarily, approached rapidly. Wang Baoli's breathing quickened, the veins in his eyes filled with blood, and his face contorted into a gruesome expression. Enlightened. Wang Baoli howled the first word to the sutra, only to be dumbfounded in the next moment. For reasons unknown, the sutra, which had come up useful as a lifesaver on many occasions, didn't respond to his call. What's going on? Wang Baoli's eyes went wide with confusion. Perhaps it only worked if he chanted it in his head. He did exactly that, hurriedly, even going to the extent of chanting the next few words that followed. However, the familiar aura that had always descended from the deepest part of the universe didn't make its appearance. Is he ignoring me? There wasn't enough time for him to think. Wang Baoli trembled as the waves of spirit energy around him intensified as the destructive force approached. A stabbing pain spread throughout his body as a glowing sphere of light appeared in the distant darkness before him. It grew in size, and within a few seconds, Wang Baoli heard a deafening rumbling. It sounded like the collapse of stars. If someone were to stand atop an elevated spot and look over, they would see an enormous ball of fire headed Wang Baoli's way. It wasn't just a mere ball of fire, it was a planet. It wasn't huge compared to other planets, but still significantly large, as big as the moon. Compared to the planet, Wang Baoli was but an ant, a speck of dust. It was still quite a distance away. Nevertheless, the waves of spirit energy around Wang Baoli were vibrating violently. Wang Baoli shuddered. An alarming sense of danger and death loomed over him, rushing through every part of his body like a tsunami. It doesn't seem like a drill. Wang Baoli panicked. His eyes were red. He had no time to think further. From what he had just learned, he knew that he had only one chance. He was either going to attain a breakthrough, or he was going to die. There was no way out. The only way was forward. Stella Mayas. Do you know how many bizarre entities I have inside my body? Do you think I'm afraid of you? Wang Baoli yelled. He raised his right hand and smacked himself hard on the chest. The devouring seed stirred, the green lotus resting inside the devouring seed swayed, and countless lightning bolts sparked to life as Wang Baoli's lightning core popped out from his mouth. Dazzling lightning bolts darted about in the air like silver serpents. The lightning core unleashed its full power as it attempted to hold its ground against the force of the charging planet. It was like a grasshopper trying to stop a horse cart. The lightning core was no match for the planet at all and began to show signs of shattering as soon as the planet drew near. Agony surged through Wang Baoli's body. With a dark look on his face, he raised his right hand and smacked his chest again without hesitation. With a loud boom, an aura more powerful than the lightning core erupted from his body. A sudden chill flooded the area, and black flames swiftly surrounded Wang Baoli. They were dark fires. Wang Baoli spat out his second core, the dark core. Waves of spirit energy rose to the skies as his dark core joined his lightning core to fight back against the planet. It still wasn't enough, but at least they managed to slow the planet down slightly. Regardless, slowing the planet down wasn't going to help at all. The starlit space before Wang Baoli was now enveloped in the light emanating from the approaching, roaring ball of fire that was a planet. He seemed unable to see anything else. There was only the planet headed his way, a sea of fire that stretched on forever into the distance, rushing at him. The force rushing towards Wang Baoli was overwhelming. The lightning core began to crack, his dark core showed signs of melting, and even his heart core was devoured instantly. It seemed like the end for him. Wang Baoli was on the edge of unconsciousness. His very life was about to be consumed by the burning, shining planet. It was then that he raised his right hand again and hit his chest, hard. If you guys don't make an appearance soon, we're all going to die. Wang Baoli howled. He could feel his life fading. The devouring seed inside his body was the first that failed to withstand the planet's power. It emerged, emanating an incredible power as it transformed into a vortex that then tried to resist the planet's charge. The planet slowed down once again. Wang Baoli's green lotus materialized next, swaying in the air and emanating endless vitality. It joined forces with the vortex to hold the planet back. He wasn't done yet. At that critical moment, as if it were dragged out like an unwilling hostage, The scabbard resting inside Wang Baoli's body materialized. Numerous sharp strands of hexes flew towards the planet. The planet finally slowed down to a crawl. A stalemate seemed to have been reached. Each moment passed in the stalemate felt like an eternity to Wang Baoli. As the weight of the planet pressed down on Wang Baoli, his body shook. His lightning core continued to crack while his dark core continued to melt. The disintegration of his physical body brought along intense pain, which tortured his mind. As the immense pressure continued, an energy of rebirth began to flow out of his disintegrating cores and envelope him. It resembled a small flame, weak and faint, and also a star in the midst of formation. The spirit energy it radiated was startling. It was as if a god was being born. It was one of the 5 legendary nascent souls, the stellar nascent soul. The stellar nascent soul continued to absorb the energy given off by Wang Baoli's 3 cores and the planet, and it continued to grow stronger. It was then that, suddenly, the abyss shuddered. An external power seemed to have realized what was going on and was about to stop the stellar nascent soul from being born. The powerful external force shook the abyss, distorting the fabric of this constructed world with its invasion. It materialized as a large illusory arm covered with red scales. The hand reached out for Wang Baoli, meaning to destroy his body and soul and stop the stellar nascent soul from being born. It was then that an icy snort suddenly resonated in the air. It was like hearing countless people snorting all at the same time. The sound was deafening. Who's the fool who dares stand in the path of my junior brother's breakthrough? A sudden glint that seemed capable of cleaving the heavens in 2 descended rapidly. It swept towards the red arm that was reaching for Wang Baoli. The sword fell. The arm was chopped off. Chapter 674, Senior Brother, are you there? Chapter 674, Senior Brother, are you there? Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. With a single sweep of the blade, the arm was sliced clean through. A blade's glint rushed past. The crimson-scaled arm that had been reaching for Wang Baoli was chopped off at the wrist. The palm disintegrated, transforming into streams of illusory fresh blood that started to rush back towards the broken arm. It was clear that wasn't going to happen. The blade that had sliced through the arm shone again, and an overpowering force descended like an invisible hand, sweeping at the blood that intended to return to the arm. The blood changed the direction of its charge instantly, rushing towards Wang Baoli. The remnant will of its original owner had been wiped clean, and it now belonged to no one. It emanated a strange power and seemed to have been transformed into some form of blood supplement. It collided with Wang Baoli's lightning core, dark core, and his physical body, and entered all 3 smoothly. Wang Baoli shook at the sudden intrusion. He had struggled to maintain a stalemate with the planet earlier and had expended all his energy doing that. But his foggy, exhausted mind felt as if it had just been given a dose of some powerful pills. His mind cleared instantly. The sudden transformation was startling, but he had no time to think too deeply about it. The blood that had suddenly surged through his body was unimaginably rich with vitality. His lightning core and dark core, nourished by this unexpectedly rich source, appeared to transform into a vast ocean that flooded his mind. A huge drum was sounding inside his head. He trembled at the sudden descent of luck upon him. Bolstered by the flood of vitality, he roared and directed it all towards achieving a breakthrough. Breakthrough! His body began to give off a bright light as the beginnings of a stellar nascent soul were slowly forming inside his body. Soon, the power of a stellar nascent soul erupted from his person. He seemed to have transformed into a star at that instant, and his spirit chi only continued to grow more powerful. Thunderous booms continued to resonate in his head, roars that rose to the heavens. He could feel power growing inside him. His breathing quickened, and he gave it his best shot as he unleashed everything he had in him, his cultivation, his physical power, his lightning core, and his dark core, and attempted to break through. Wang Baoli looked like a star that was about to be born. The light emanating from his body, and the halo around him, continued to grow in size and brightness. Soon, the planet before him began to tremble. The stalemate was about to be broken. The power of Wang Baoli's star was about to be unleashed fully. A star was about to be born. Everything might seem like it was taking place in slow motion, but in reality, the entire sequence of events From Chen Qing's first blow to Wang Baoli's absorption of the blood and finally to the eruption of a star's aura, took place within the blink of an eye. Just as the power of his star was about to be fully unleashed, a howl filled with pain and fury pierced through the starlit space. It was a sound that inspired fear and awe. Wang Baoli's spirit energy immediately showed signs of instability. Why are you still here after delivering the goods? Are you planning to stay for dinner? Chen Qing's cold voice resonated through the air almost simultaneously. It was followed by the glint of a blade, appearing suddenly and vanishing the next instant. A pained scream rang out. Get lost. Make another sound, and I'll kill you. Chen Qing snorted and then said coldly as the pained cry resonated in the air. The abyss trembled, and the patch of universe that they were in seemed to shake. It was then that the screaming suddenly stopped. Despite its anger and resentment, it dared not make another sound. It had no choice but to leave. The maimed arm disappeared alongside the presence. It was as if the unknown entity had never been there. Immediately after, things began running again in this patch of the universe. With no one holding him back, Wang Baoli let loose a fierce howl that rippled through space. The light gathering outside his body flared and surged outwards. It was blinding and seemed to go on for miles. The ball of light was shining brightly like the sun and the birth of a star at the same time. Cracking sounds, like pieces of eggshell breaking off, echoed in space. I said, break through. Wang Baoli roared. His cultivation erupted instantly, breaking through the perfected core formation realm and entering the nascent soul realm. A star's power rose to the heavens the moment he entered the nascent soul realm. One could almost see a tiny person inside the glaring sphere of light stretching all four limbs. That was the nascent soul. One of the 5 great legendary nascent souls, a forbidden art, the stellar nascent soul. A sense of unprecedented power grew inside Wang Baoli. He felt as if he had the power to master the stars and to travel through space. Wang Baoli's breathing quickened. He could see a familiar figure in the distance. There was a gourd in his hand, and he raised it at Wang Baoli, like a greeting. Senior brother, Wang Baoli's eyes widened as he murmured. The familiar figure didn't wait for him to speak further. With a flap of his sleeve, the planet before Wang Baoli, as well as the abyss, began to tremble. Their forms blurred before Wang Baoli's eyes, then shattered into pieces. An incredible force rushed at Wang Baoli, swept him away, and pulled him downwards into what seemed like an endless fall. Then, it vanished. Before it disappeared completely, Chen Qing's voice rang out inside Wang Baoli's fuzzy head. My dear junior brother, you don't have much time left. I'll be coming to take you away soon. The abyss faded, bringing with it Wang Baoli. Everything faded to black. Chen Qing lifted the gourd to his lips and took a sip. He seemed pleased as he turned and started singing. When the heavens and earth separate, the cycle of fate stops. Knowing what happened in the past, the one who suffers now is. Knowing what's to come in the future, the one who is working hard now is. It was an ancient song that sounded older when he sang it. Just as he was about to fade into the darkness, he suddenly froze. He turned his head, as if he had just noticed something, and stared into the distance. His eyes seemed to travel through space as they landed on the solar system and the ancient sword inside the galaxy. He stared for a long while before suddenly laughing. Such arrogance when it's just a mere star-seeding Tao. So be it. It'll serve as a supplement for my junior brother when it matures. Not bad at all. Chen Qing smiled, then turned and walked away, fading into the darkness. On the sword tip of the ancient sword, where the 3 great palaces were found, Wang Baoli reappeared outside the Tao disciples' palace amidst a blinding light. He immediately lifted his head and stared around him, his breathing quickening. Senior brother, Wang Baoli murmured, then fell silent. He recalled everything that had happened since they had set off for the battleship. He began to realize the things that hadn't made sense after some careful thinking. His final battle with Daoist Yuran, especially, made him realize something. As Wang Baoli was deep in thought, he had no idea about the shock that little Missy was experiencing inside the mask. In fact, shock was too mild a word for what she was feeling right now. This little fatty, he actually managed to cultivate a stellar nascent soul. My father told me that only madmen would choose to cultivate this nascent soul. This awful fatty. Little Missy was going mad. It wasn't due to jealousy, it was due to the words she had said previously that she now remembered. The feeling of her words holding some sort of power that turned mere words into reality overcame her again. As long as she said something was beyond his reach, he would somehow achieve it. Little Missy was beginning to feel slightly terrified. What's so amazing about him, anyway? He simply has a really powerful senior brother. Little Missy finally murmured, almost fearfully, to herself after some time. After some time, once Wang Baoli finally made sense of things, he finally took a deep breath. The series of events led him to an important discovery. So, senior brother enjoys spying. He's been watching all this while. At that thought, Wang Baoli surveyed his surroundings again. His eyes fell on the third palace. He blinked, then coughed suddenly. Senior brother, won't you help out your handsome little junior brother and unlock the third palace for him? Wang Baoli said, then waited with great anticipation. Nothing happened. He thought for a bit, then spoke again, the expression on his face wide-eyed and ready to please. My dearest senior brother, this is your dearest, most precious junior brother, Wang Baoli, who's been living a lonesome, hard life for years. Senior brother, your cultivation is beyond parallel and your swordsmanship amazing. Please help me unlock the third palace. Senior brother, stop with the tests. Just unlock the third palace. Senior brother, I'm getting angry. Senior brother, are you still there? Chapter 675, Present as long as the star is. Chapter 675, Present as long as the star is. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Wang Baoli scratched his head, then looked around. Despite how hard he had pleaded, there was still no reply from his senior brother, who clearly enjoyed spying on him. He couldn't help but wonder if the senior brother he had the fortune to stumble upon had left. No way. Is he really gone? Wang Baoli blinked. He tried shouting for his senior brother a few more times and received no reply. He sighed. His senior brother was likely gone. Even if he was still around, it wasn't likely that he was going to make an appearance before Wang Baoli. So be it. I, Wang Baoli, have always relied on my own abilities. It must be my fate. I'm not destined to take shortcuts and rely on others, Wang Baoli muttered and tried to console himself. He ignored the soft snort that little Missy made when she heard that. Wang Baoli had reached a point where he could now ignore the scornful words that little Missy said that he felt were clearly spoken out of envy. Besides, he was an optimist by nature. He might have sighed at his current predicament, but he moved on quickly, growing excited after assessing his current level of cultivation. The nascent soul realm. Wang Baoli's heart burned, and excitement colored his eyes. He realized how much more powerful he was now compared to when he had been at the core formation realm. The difference was unimaginable. This only intensified the excitement he was feeling. I should learn my lesson, though, and not be too full of myself. I should only declare my choice after hearing everything the other party has to say. Wang Baoli recalled everything that had happened in the Dao Disciples' Palace, then concluded seriously. He didn't start thinking about how to get into the third palace. Instead, he sat down, crossed his legs, and began to stabilize his cultivation. The devouring seed, the green lotus, and the scabbard had all returned to his body. There was now a tiny person on the green lotus though. A translucent, tiny person, with starlight emanating from its tiny body. He was built, like a tiny fat person. He looked exactly like Wang Baoli and was sitting on the green lotus with a serious look on his face. His scabbard had shrunk considerably. It circled his nascent soul, emanating a fearsome aura. His devouring seed radiated a similar light. It was rotating in time with his breathing. It was as if he was the center of everything. All living things were but an audience to his majesty. His heart raced wildly. It was as if he had just been crowned as ruler of all living things. As his cultivation stabilized, he began to organize and go through the information on the stellar nascent soul that had flooded his brain. A long time passed before Wang Baoli finally opened his eyes. The excitement in his eyes didn't fade with the gradual stabilization of his cultivation. Instead, it intensified. He had gained new knowledge as he went through the volumes of information in his head, and his heart raced at the new discoveries. Is the stellar nascent soul really that powerful? Wang Baoli's breathing quickened. He was still in a state of disbelief, despite having repeatedly gone through the information in his head. The stellar nascent soul had been labeled as a forbidden art not simply because of how difficult it was to master, but also because of how powerful it was. The stellar nascent soul was born from a collision with a planet. As a result, it possessed a certain quality that other nascent souls lacked. It might be more accurate to call it an intrinsic property. Because of this intrinsic property, the closer in proximity a cultivator was to a planet, the more powerful he would become. His strength was influenced by the planets. In fact, one might argue that the owner of a stellar nascent soul could absorb the incredible powers of a planet. In conclusion, a cultivator with a stellar nascent soul was a terrifying opponent in battle as long as there was a planet in the vicinity. In fact, the boost in power increased with the size and uniqueness of the planet. Based on the information that Wang Baoli had received, there was no limit to how much one's power could be augmented. The only limiting factor was the size of a planet, as there was a limit to how big a planet could get. Theoretically speaking, if there existed an infinitely big and indestructible planet, Wang Baoli would be near invincible as long as he stayed within its vicinity. This was the power granted by one of the 5 legendary nascent souls, the forbidden art, the stellar nascent soul. Incredible! Wang Baoli's heart raced wildly, and his breathing grew uneven. He almost couldn't believe his luck. It took him some time to come to terms with how powerful he had suddenly become. He lifted his face skyward and burst out laughing, his spirits soaring. The hardships he had suffered were all worth it. The heavens are indeed fair. The world might be filled with people who have gained plenty without working hard for it, or who have landed themselves in accidental fortunes out of sheer luck, but the fates would never deny a man the reward he had toiled and sweated hard for. Little Missy noticed the smug look on Wang Baoli's face and heard words that rendered her speechless. A sense of exasperation and powerlessness fell over her. She sighed. As long as you're happy. Wang Baoli ignored Little Missy's sarcastic comments and got to his feet. He puffed his chest out and placed his hands behind his back. Brimming with pride and arrogance, he glanced sideways at the last sealed palace. The look in his eyes turned sharp. The aura of a powerful cultivator erupted from his person moments later, rumbling. It was an aura that surpassed that of a core formation realm cultivator. It belonged to a cultivator at the nascent soul realm. A storm howled around him, and starlight sparkled, fading in and out inside the storm. The strength of this howling spirit energy grew as Wang Baoli unleashed his full cultivation. His spirit chi intensified and finally materialized as an illusory shadow of Wang Baoli's nascent soul. The appearance of this mere illusion sent the heavens and earth quaking. Fierce winds started howling as the storm around Wang Baoli gained strength. An intense light flashed in Wang Baoli's eyes. He yelled, then charged forward with a sudden burst of speed. He broke the sound barrier instantly, forming after-images of his person in his wake as he headed straight for the 3rd palace. Upon approaching, he roared and sent his fist flying while unleashing the divine armament arm. Shatter! A deafening thunder rippled through the air. Then, following it, a cry of pain. Wang Baoli was flung backwards, his body curled outwards as he flew through the air and crashed into the ground. The land shook upon impact, a crater forming from his crash. Silence descended. Wang Baoli took a while before he finally crawled out of the crater. He looked in a sorry state. He stared miserably at the 3rd palace, which was unaffected by his earlier blow. He rotated his aching wrists and sighed. I was too full of myself. Wang Baoli rubbed his wrists and stared at the 3rd palace resentfully. It would be a great loss if he simply left. His gains from the last 2 palaces had been too attractive. The prize to be won from entering the 3rd palace was likely as or more attractive. How do I get myself inside? I'm not qualified enough. A considering look appeared in Wang Baoli's eyes. He had been able to enter the 1st palace because he had been qualified, while he had managed to get into the 2nd palace by making use of the bones of Li Wuchen's previous incarnation. So, even a Dao disciple isn't qualified to enter the palace. Only someone whose rank is higher than a Dao disciple's can meet the requirements for entry. Wang Baoli thought. Based on his understanding of the vast expanse Tao Palace, only an elder was higher in rank than a Tao disciple. But it was obvious that possessing an ordinary elder's rank wasn't going to get him through the doors. What he needed was a Grand Elder or even a Grand Supreme Elder. That would be perfect. Where am I to find such things? Wang Baoli sighed, exasperated. He had half a mind to give up. Then, something flickered in his eyes, and they started to shine fiercely. The gears in his head began spinning furiously as countless images flooded his brain. The last image that lingered was that of a gigantic corpse lying in a sea of blood, emanating incredible power, invulnerable even to the spatial tears around it. That was what Wang Baoli had seen the first time he had used the immortal platform, the sight that had sent him reeling back with shock. He suspected then that the corpse must have belonged to someone really important. Wang Baoli's heart stuttered at the thought of the corpse. He soon came to a decision. I'll find the corpse and retrieve a bit of its flesh. It'd be better if I could get its blood as well. The aura emanating from that might be able to help me unlock the third palace. At that thought, Wang Baoli turned around and immediately rushed off in search of the immortal platform. The vast expanse Tao Palace on the ancient sword was vast, and numerous immortal platforms could be found in the region. Some might have been destroyed when the heavens and earth had collapsed, but many more still existed in the sword tip. Wang Baoli soon located one after a brief search. After some shameless pleading from Wang Baoli, a resigned little missy taught him how to operate the immortal platform. It didn't take long before the immortal platform began to tremble. Smoke rose to the skies as Wang Baoli melded with the smoke and rose to the heavens. He remembered vaguely where the corpse had been found. Now that he could operate the immortal platform with greater control, it didn't take him very long, only half a day, before the smoke that he was traveling in arrived at a sea of blood. Blood chi rose from the sea of blood below him, red lightning bolts streaked the skies as thunder roared, and a gigantic corpse floated in the middle of the sea of blood, awe-inspiring and imposing like a god. It might be dead, but its powerful aura still remained. It was powerful and far-reaching, casting an oppressive weight over the spatial tears and distortions around it.